be with you all. And again, I was mentioning a second ago, if I could just be doing something all day long, I'd be discussing art. So that's what I do. And I offer courses in all sorts of different things. And usually I would say that my favorite course to teach is contemporary art. So kind of exactly what we're going to look at today. So yeah, my experience has been varied. I've taught courses and done research and traveled to look at art from prehistoric through Greek and Roman, all the way to Renaissance through modern and contemporary. So I do teach courses that kind of comprise all of those. So again, I picked out what I think is just a really good cross section of what is going on in art right now. I usually go into a presentation like this, not assuming any knowledge at all. So I try, just like I would do with my students as well, I try not to use the extra large words that are going to confuse everybody, but I'm glad to kind of go into that and explain them if we want to, right? So otherwise, I usually make sure to start out a little bit informal like that, because some of the artwork, most of the artwork, you probably haven't seen before unless it made it right into the news, right? So, okay, so I'm going to share my screen now, and I think I'm going to share the full screen. Okay, and I want to share this out. Okay, so okay, so can everybody see my PowerPoint slides and then see us as well? Everybody's good with that? Okay. Yeah. So the idea of whittling down what's going on in the art world is sometimes a very difficult proposition. So for instance, these 4 that I've chosen would almost comprise about 4 units out of like a usual 12 or 13 that I might cover. So by no means is this it, but these cover a lot of different things within several of them. So these 4 I've just chosen, they're kind of interesting, and I usually use those titles to kind of draw people in a little bit. So the first one that I'll talk about is the ongoing battle of fine art and what fine art is. And I open it to all of you as well. Do you think all the things that I'm going to show you today are going to be fine art or not? I mean, we all are allowed to have opinions. You are. Don't let anybody tell you you're not allowed, okay? Your opinions can be better informed by certain things, like, again, attending talks like this or reading several materials. I was going to show, like, the book that I teach out of is right here, if I can give you some recommendations for it. But again, please, everybody have an opinion on the art. It can't really be a wrong opinion, okay? So we'll talk about that. Then one of the major things that's kind of going on in the world of art, and really has been for at least a couple of decades now, but it's really come into the forefront of the art productive world, is identity politics. And I would loop the human body, or just the conceptualization of the body and what that means for identity of people in there. So that's kind of a larger second topic to talk about. And then the last 2 are really interesting. Okay, I call one the hyper-commercialization of art. And you'll know exactly what I mean when we get there. Okay, so this means the using and conceptualizing of art is not only just something to look at, but something that is going to be sold. Okay, so we do need to talk about it as, well, around the time of, I think, Reagan and Reaganomics, when some sort of downturns with the economy went there, people started investing in art, right? And the art was actually giving them much better returns than the market. So that happened about call it 30 or 40 years ago, and it's still kind of working like that. So that's really about the value of art and how we perceive that value. And then maybe the most fun, I suppose, art as spectacle and experiential art. Now, if I didn't cover that topic, and I think I didn't cover it in my last talk, you'd be missing something, because most of the things that you all in this Zoom room might have seen so far are going to fall maybe into those things, the things that draw people into museums and galleries nowadays. So those are the 4 that we'll kind of look at, and I've picked several really interesting things in there, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, so the ongoing battle of fine art. I say in here, painting is not dead yet. All right, and sometimes people think that's a weird statement to make. What does that mean, right? painting, and I would say painting and sculpture, have always been the two categories of fine art that are inarguable, right? So everybody thinks that you put something in the Louvre, you put something in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. If it's painting, if it's sculpture, we can call it fine art, full stop, right? Everything else, performance art, I don't want to hear about it, right? Fine art is only painting on a wall, okay? Then a lot of people said once about the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s came around, well, nobody's making paintings anymore. So is the painting dead as a medium? So I'm here to tell you it's not dead yet. And there are a lot of different ways now of painting things and even making artworks painterly, okay? So let's go right into the interesting one. So I wanted to say especially that sometimes it's not when the art was produced, but when it was sold and consumed as well, right? So many of you probably have heard of Jean-Michel Basquiat, right? So Basquiat is maybe one of the most famous painters to come out of the kind of the New York and Soho area scene in the 80s. And he's obviously quite famous as well because he died young, in that time period. So I wanted to show this one because 2017, I guess now that seems like forever ago, right? Just 4 years ago, he set the record. Of course, he's deceased now, but he set the record in 2017. This painting, Untitled, sold for $110 million, okay? That is something that needs to be reckoned with. And now, if you think that it's worth that or not, that's okay, right? But somebody, and actually I should say many somebodies, right? So like, let's see, Sotheby's, the auction house, the buyer, the art market when they valued it, somebody said this was worth $110 million, and we agreed, right? So maybe the art community maybe agreed. So that means it's important. I put right down on the bottom here too. If you don't think that Basquiat and his paintings and his kind of metaphorical and text type of style is relevant, ask companies like Uniqlo, these massive companies, apparel companies nowadays that have these huge deals. And if you can see my mouse again, right on the T-shirt down here, that crown symbol over the picture of Basquiat is one of the major symbols to come out of his artwork. So Uniqlo, the Japanese company, now they're selling it too, and people are buying it. The reason I would say that Basquiat still remains so important in the painting world is because of this shifting narrative of his work. So in the 1980s, when he first came out and kind of made a big star out of himself, he was making things just like this, right? Just like this painting that we see here. And he was called, and I say it's misleading and disrespectful because of how we've run it through several different filters of our theory nowadays. He was called an urban primitive, right? So urban primitive, we still use kind of terms like that today, but we hopefully at least are monitoring why we're using those terms too. Basically, let's say it this way. He was a young Black youth in New York City with no training, and then he got famous, and people wondered how, right? So whether that's disrespectful or not, it happened, okay? Now we run these paintings, and again, he uses a lot of text that you see in the painting, like down here and in other places like this, and also these very rudimentary strokes of art, right? Or I should say brushwork strokes. And even some down here looks like it might even be unfinished or something like that, okay? So this is why people thought that he was just doing something that was absolutely new and different from anything they've seen before. And they thought it must owe to the fact that he doesn't know anything about art, right? So those two things kind of mixed together, and he had a very strange reception at the time, but people were starting to pay money, big money, for his paintings already. Certainly not $110 million, but he was asked to work with Andy Warhol, among others. So his star kind of burned brightly. Right. So he's kind of making a comeback in terms of the relevance of his work, because if you can get your hands on these, and they're usually, his paintings are very large. So a lot of the times like 6 or 8 feet wide. So if you can ever get your hands on these, it's like when the Leonardo da Vinci, the lost Leonardo da Vinci came out a couple of years ago and somebody paid $400 million. If you can get your hands on something like this, if it comes up for auction, those values kind of get up there, right? Okay, I wanted to lead with that because there is also situations like this, and I'm hoping that some of you might have seen this situation unfold. let me play you the Inside Edition video.
Art connoisseurs could only watch in horror as an expensive piece was shredded before their eyes. No sooner did the gavel come down to mark the sale of Banksy's Girl with Balloon for a record $1.4 million, did the picture start to slip out of its frame into shreds below. The anonymous artist claims to be behind the stunt. On Instagram, he posted a photo of his prank with the caption, "Going, going, gone." In a later post, he explained how he did it. And it seems this stunt was years in the making. He claims he built the shredder into the painting's frame in case it ever sold at auction.
400,000, yeah, 400,000, 600,000, you'll make 600,000. Last chance. And selling for 860,000.
Witnesses couldn't believe what they were seeing. We can only imagine what the buyer was thinking. The person's identity hasn't been revealed. Sotheby's claims it was shocked by the stunt. The auction house is also trying to figure out what this means for the value of the painting.
Okay, so let me stop the clip there because this is kind of a good question to ask if anybody has opinions on this. So many of you, raise your hand or thumbs up if you've heard of Banksy before. Okay, so maybe some of us. So Banksy is kind of world renowned for nobody knowing who he actually is. He's kept it anonymous. There are people that claim to know who he is. He does works that we consider graffiti art or street art, and they are usually illegal by nature, right? So he usually breaks into places or uses the sides of buildings, and he does not ask permission to actually go up and spray paint these buildings, okay? That's really what the comment is here, because so that's Banksy's art. Do you think if somebody like Banksy is usually using illegal space like that to present his political commentary or satire, do you think he wants you to own that side of a building and put it in your gallery or your house? People have said no, like, of course, he doesn't want that. So it makes sense to me that he would build a shredder into his own painting if it ever went to auction, and like they said, it sold for 1.5 million. So again, this is, I should say, and I should preface this, that little painting that you see there, that was on the side of a building. Okay, so this is essentially a print of that, right? So it's not even what we would call the original artwork. So that's why it's a record at 1.5 million for a print of an artwork like that. So they just asked the question, and maybe we can just start with a question like that. Do you think that this artwork went up or down in value once this stunt happened? Anybody?
Well, I mean, I thought it was like, because I remember when that happened, I think I saw it like the day after that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was so on brand for Banksy to have done that. I'm a huge fan of his. I think like I'm all for like the kind of guerrilla art. Mm-hmm. I love it.
It's that you don't need permission to create art, right? And so he takes advantage
exactly.
of it. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, his anonymity has made him more famous, but also it's made him more popular because, you know, he's obviously not just doing it like for his 15 minutes. I mean, he can still, you know, go to the shops or whatever and no one knows who he is. I think it probably, for people who are interested in his type of art, I would assume that this is only going to make it go up, because then you're not only getting the actual artwork, but you're also getting a sort of performance art with it.
Right. All of those things you basically just said probably make that. And I think that it's not gone back to auction. So that's usually the only way we can see if it really is went up in value. But the idea, especially because if you notice, it seemed to have stopped itself from shredding halfway down. I guess that was not supposed to happen. It was supposed to just shred it on the floor. So it did malfunction. So it's still a usable work of art now, right? You could still put that thing up on your wall and you would see that story that Banksy has written into it. with the shredding. So my guess is this thing tripled or quadrupled in value once this happened, the way it's at. So again, it's hard to tell until it goes back to auction, but this, I think, then is a commentary on the value of painting, right? So Banksy thought that his own painting was worth basically nothing. I mean, when you go and shred your papers in your paper shredder, you are saying that those papers no longer have any value to you, right? So if he says there's no value to his painting, that's kind of a comment. Somebody said it had $1.5 million worth of value. So we have competing odds here, right? Competing amounts of money, all of these different things. So that's why I think, again, painting is not dead yet, but there are commentaries on the worth, the value of painting. And again, this is just an isolated scenario, I think. And I guess I hope, I don't hope that this happens with every single artwork, but I'm glad it happened maybe once, right? So we can kind of talk about that. Okay. I just wanted to show just a couple of other examples of the scenario that still exists where if you are a painter and if you are a great painter, you will still be able to sell your works and you will still be able to get very high critical praise. This is one of the artists that falls into that category. So the artist's name is Candy Wiley. So this one, Prince Tommaso Francesco of Savoy Carignano. So if you're reading that name of the painting with me and looking at this painting, a lot of people are wondering, A, have I seen this painting before? Or have I seen this subject before? And they also ask, well, what's so different about it? It feels like there's some sort of like bait and switch here or something like that. Because again, made in 2006, right? And a lot of people find, and I'll put it right up there for you, a lot of people find the analog. And here we go, here's the Napoleon 1801. So you have seen something like this before. The big difference is that Kehinde Wiley is really interested because he is a highly critically analyzed painter. And if you just look at the painting itself, the technique is magnificent, right? So this looks like something like the Napoleon painting, that it should be up in the Louvre in Paris and be appreciated for what it is, right? But 2006, and now we have a different person, a different skin color occupying that usual white hero trope. Do you see that? So basically, just by looking at this, you are almost confused into thinking that this is a historical situation that really happened, right? It is not, right? This is basically just taking a person of color and putting them where the white hero should be, right? And again, I kind of put it with this quote too. It's the idea of positioning a young Black male where he historically shouldn't be or wasn't invited to be, right? On the white rearing horse, presumably, at the, any type of crossing the Alps, like with Hannibal or something like that. This is a switch, right? And that type of schism in people's minds sometimes allows us to walk right into the discussion of identity too, right? And who is being painted and who has been painted and who is it okay to paint through the course of human history, right? So that's why this is usually a very highly regarded artist. And if you think you've seen his style before, he actually also painted the Barack Obama official National Gallery portrait that went in 2018, I think it went into the National Gallery. So you've probably seen his style. I wanted to bring one last example from him in here. Again, I try to bring some of my talks all the way up to present if I can. This is absolutely new, just unveiled. And 2020, I guess we could call it 2021. It's the COVID era screws up everything in my head, right? So it's now in the new Penn Station in New York City, the Moynihan Train Hall. This is the first permanent installation in glass by this artist. So I think you can tell if you look at the image on the right, if you're looking up at this glass painted ceiling, it looks like the painted style that you just saw on canvas, but it's an entirely different medium and it's intended to be looked at in a different way, right? When you look up, right, what do you think you're seeing? Do you guys notice anything that that he's alluding to with some of these figures, or maybe another prominent thing that looks exactly like this?
The Sistine Chapel.
I was going to say, and I think I put it at the bottom there too. That's okay, right? But if you've ever been to the Sistine Chapel, this is presented almost the exact same way. You come into a somewhat narrow-ish space, and you look up, and you are supposed to be wowed by the imagery. And I put on there too. So The creation of Adam scene, that's the idea of God's figure reaching across and pointing out to Adam. And if you notice, it gets cropped right here, but right here, this is interpreted by Wiley to be an allusion to that idea of reaching out. So again, when you use the subject matter or allude to subject matter like God creating Adam, this is now strange, right? So like I say in here, this is using young Black New Yorkers frozen in breakdancing inspired poses as the thing that goes up there in something that's the analog to a Sistine Chapel. So to me, this is inviting an entirely different section of people into the sphere of fine art. So that's why I put it in this battle for fine art, right? Who is allowed to be painted, right? Can breakdancing figures like this take the place of angels on the Sistine Chapel, right? So it begs you to ask the question, like I always tell my students too, there is no perfect answer to why this is done, but most of it is about asking the question and understanding kind of what is happening, right? Okay, so Kehinde Wiley. All right, and the last of the straight painters that we'll look at is Julie Miretu. So I got to see her speak just a few years ago specifically about this painting. If you'll notice, if you've seen anything from modern art or abstract expressionist art, you might have realized the style that she's going for. And let me kind of just wait a second and then put it up there. If you notice, I usually liken this to a Jackson Pollock, right? So if you've heard of Jackson Pollock before, the comparison between the two of these, it can sometimes even be disrespectful to Pollock because a lot of people say Miretu is a more accomplished Jackson Pollock, right? So, or a person that paints abstract expressionist things that actually are about something. Okay, so that's basically jibing Jackson Pollock, saying your stuff isn't about anything. It doesn't have to be about anything. But this one in particular, Julie Miretu, for her cities series, she's actually taking a lot of different architectural documents from the history of planet Earth. She had some Mesopotamian documents in this one. I think if you can kind of see in some places, there is an analog here of the D-Day beaches in France, right? So actually architecturally mapped in there, and down to her, well, she was from East Lansing, Michigan, but she takes Detroit as well. And she's trying to analyze this whole basically entropy of a city like Detroit. So all of these, she doesn't expect that you're going to go in there and be able to actually discern all of the different architectural things. But when all of them are thrown together like this, it makes you realize that she had to explode them apart first to put them back together, right? A lot of these little kind of blips in it, if you notice down by the bottom left here too, a lot of these are added to make you think about little groups of people being inserted into there too. So then you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, it says Black City. So what city is this? Is this Detroit? Am I supposed to realize that all of these people are moving in different areas? So again, there's not supposed to be any specific convenient answer to this, but that's also why and I hope a lot of other people enjoy art, right? It's not supposed to always just tell you the whole story and then you just move on to the next one. A lot of people were buying Pollocks in the first place, and now artists like Miretu, because they like to think, right? They like to look, right? So, all right, so that's my painting's not dead, okay? All right, so identity politics in the body, there's a couple of just big projects I want you to be aware of, and these might not all be paintings, okay? So like when we go through some of these, but they are, I would say most of them I tried to say are involving the human body in that expression of identity as well. So let me just dive right in. Okay, these projects are really interesting. So Yinka Shonibari is an artist, and I believe it was born in Nigeria, I think, and now lives in England and kind of uses those different travels and different sections of his identity to kind of do his artworks. Now, I hope at least the one on the left is a little jarring for you when you see it, but you won't exactly realize why, right? So what you're seeing, especially in the one on the left, but also on the right, is this kind of proliferation of what appears to be an interesting fabric, right? And this is actually called Dutch wax fabric. Anybody heard of that before? So Dutch wax fabric has a very complicated history. Okay, when you look at these figures here and you see the Dutch wax fabric, what Yinka Shonibare wants you to do, and what you almost naturally do, is think, wow, those are African fashions, right? So it's okay if you think that in your head, because they are. But listen to what Dutch wax fabric actually is, okay? The reason it came about is because Dutch settlers, all the way back in like the 1600s, okay, they went to Indonesia and they found a specific pattern making called batik or batik, right? They liked it. That's in Indonesia. That's a half or 3/4 of the world away from where the Dutch came from, okay, in their colonial travels. They liked that fabric. They thought they were going to bring it back and try to then sell it, okay? So they were going to try to sell it. They manufactured it. I guess it ended up being in Manchester, England, and then were selling it or marketing it to West Africa, okay? I hope that just is a little weird to you, right? So we're going to sell this fabric that we think looks African to you Africans, right? But they have no investment at all in Africa besides the colonial interests, okay? So the complicated nature of that fabric is on full display here, right? So now you're seeing all of a sudden what looks like there are figures wearing the fabric that look like they're getting taken advantage of here, right? To put it mildly. Do you notice, though, that Yinka Shonibare almost always in his works, he takes and he lops the heads off of these mannequins. And if you notice, a lot of the times there's long stockings on all of the legs, and you can't see what skin color is doing what to what skin color, okay? But you do, and you're asked to notice that the Dutch wax fabric is alluding to this African fabric. But remember, it wasn't, right? It wasn't an African fabric at all. So with a little bit of kind of the dangling carriage back there too, this is definitely a comment on colonialism and how it has basically messed with the entirety of the world, but mostly Africa, again, where Yinka Shonibare comes from initially, right? It's kind of, so if you look at the image on the right, this one then appears to move into the sphere of talking about how the post-colonial nature of the world has impacted feminist theory as well. But again, ask yourself, why is this one about a female on the right? He calls it lady walking a tightrope, but again, we have no head, right? We have no information about this person. Who is it? Is it anybody? Nobody? We actually don't know. And then walking a tightrope is a metaphor for one specific thing, right? It means that no matter what you do, you're probably going to fall, okay? So you have to walk that tightrope, you have to balance everything. So again, I think the comment and the statement is there, but again, that's what Yinka Shonibare is really looking for. I love that there's no heads on any of these things, because the head, the face, gives you so much information. When it's gone, you have nothing, right? So, or you have very little. I wanted to show you a new project. So this is, again, one of the most contemporary projects from Yinka Shonibare, called the American Library. And he did an English library before this. So he's using all sorts of different library materials and newsreels and tablets, like you can see on the bottom left there, an actual tablet that you would come across in the gallery. And here, it's an illustration of the reasons that people immigrated to the USA. That's all of these stories contained in, and if you can see as well, Dutch wax fabric is on the covers of the books, right? So it's making you, and it's putting you right into the colonial nature of how we all got here today, and then making you read those stories. And some of them are interesting, right? So I just put a couple of these because they especially mention it in the gallery catalog. So we have W.E.B. Du Bois, father was from Haiti. Walt Disney, father born in Canada. Donald Trump, mother born in Scotland, right? So the quote at the bottom is from Shonibare himself. Part of the story of America is that the very people that came from elsewhere now seek to close the door and deny people the opportunities they enjoyed. So again, I'm usually not about making anything political. It's what the artist has to say, and it's what you get out of the work, right? So this is about post-colonial world nature, right? And the rest of it is up to you. So you can read these stories. You can sit down at the tablets and actually read all of these and see if it affects you, right? So that's kind of the idea behind some of these works. Okay, all right, I had to show you this one. Most people consider this, and it's usually at least in the top 20s, this might be the single most important artwork since the year 2000, according to most people. The reason it's so dramatic, this is by an artist, Kara Walker, and you almost have to read the entirety of, it's called a subtlety, but there's usually a subtext that's included in the museum's description, and that would be, or the marvelous sugar baby, an homage to the unpaid and overworked artisans who have refined our sweet tastes from the cane fields to the kitchens of the New World, and the occasion of the demolition of the Domino sugar refining plant. That was a sugar refining plant in Brooklyn. This sculpture is made out of the sugar that they used in that plant. It's now gone. It's demolished, and the artwork doesn't exist either. Okay. Some people kind of like that. If there's just an ephemeral moment in time that this happened and now it's gone, it makes it more special to some people. So what I think is very interesting about this one, Kara Walker tends to be what some people call controversial in her displays. Now, Kara Walker identifies as Black, right? She always plays with the ideas of Black and white. So you can see here again, this is made to be in the central character is like a sphinx, right? So you can see the character is kind of bending forward like that, and I show you a couple of views. Kara Walker's talking about it involving the mammy stereotype, if you notice with the tied bandana up here as well. She represents her figures a lot of the times with, again, exaggerated breasts. And if you notice on the bottom right, look at the actual, like the back of the sculpture. This is a over-sexualized version of a Black person, a Black female, right? And I think we can agree that that's what it's about. Why is it about that, though, right? So sometimes what Kara Walker does, again, by making this out of sugar, and she makes it absolutely clear in the title of the work that basically the Black population of America, all the way back from the slave trade all the way through to now, working in, or right before it got demolished, working in the sugar refining plant, that Black people, Black bodies, Black faces are the ones that are responsible for almost the entire sugar trade in America. And so this entire thing is on the backs of peoples that are now getting, again, well, with the modern political situation, we're starting to talk about this. And I guess what Kara Walker was saying is that, why haven't we been talking about this, right? So it's a little bit about revisionist history, and it's a lot about, again, this kind of over-sexualizing of Black female figures. There are several artists that do talk about that now, like Renee Cox is another artist that talks about that. So again, very impressive by the scale, just the largeness of once you get into this sugar refinery and saw this artwork, and the many layers of what's going on in it too are really quite important. Okay. Let's go on. All right. I wanted to show you at least one of these huge commissions, and huge by scale and also huge by importance, that have been commissioned to go into the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the last couple of years. This one I wanted to include especially because you probably all have seen this subject matter before, but not the imagery, certainly not the imagery, right? This is, and I guess we would call this the Great Hall Commission at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I like that it was commissioned and essentially procured by the Met, because that's a 6 million person a year American museum that's usually, again, considered 1, 2, or 3 in the world, right? So a lot of people go there, a lot of people know it. So this is now, I would say that both of these two paintings were, I think they were at least 20 feet wide, 10 feet high. So you cannot miss them once you're in the museum itself. They're to the left and to the right once you go on the inside of the Great Hall. Now, let's see, did I put it in there? I don't think I did. Good, perfect. The bottom right-hand image, anybody recognize what that image is?
Washington crossing the Delaware.
That's Washington crossing the Delaware. What is Washington replaced by here?
American Indian, looks like.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is so large that you can go up and actually look at it and do your own kind of analysis. But again, I've given you a little bit about what Kent Monkman, the artist, has said about this. So again, it's a complicated figure, but you are looking at what appears to be, again, Kent Monkman has said that this is a virtual alter ego of even himself, right? So Kent Monkman is a member of the Cree Nation, okay? And I say here, it's important to note that this whole series of paintings is really, really about reversing art history's colonial gaze. Now, what that kind of means is that people like me, art historians, for the longest time, we always have a specific way that we look at art or look at paintings. And when it was Washington crossing the Delaware, you look at a painting like that and you say, wow, you know, like what a hero, you know, like this is a huge example of the American Revolutionary War, right? So this is a huge event. So again, what happens if that's not Washington, right? Because again, these are just paintings. No painting that's ever been painted has to be 100% true to what happened. And a lot of people say that Washington crossing the Delaware actually wasn't even true in the way that was represented either, right? So like you said, the head character here and the one on the top has really shifted a lot of the things that we are okay with a hero being, right? So in this one, yes, it looks like we have, and let's call it Cree, a Native American person, right? And it looks a little bit, if you notice, that Native American person is also kind of has this shawl and high heels as well. Well, okay, so now this makes some people a little bit nervous, right? What does this all mean? Are we saying that George Washington was a transgendered Native American person? That's not what's being said here, but it is asking you to consider other possibilities and other theories. So again, what's been said about this is that in the Cree Nation, they do have this idea of the indigenous two-spirit tradition, which does embrace a third gender and non-binary sexuality, okay? So that is, and like I say, it's absolutely contrary to what the people that would originally have painted the Washington crosses the Delaware. They don't admit the possibilities of a person that you see here even existing, okay? We do need to admit that other types of people, sexualities, genders do exist. Again, we've been having problems either accepting or not accepting a different type of person, but this asks you, it begs you to admit their existence, right? So what if we take Washington, who everybody's always focused on, and make it a discussion, right? So again, this isn't, and I think Monkman has said the same thing, this isn't any disrespect to Washington or Leutze that painted the original painting. This is asking new questions. This is subverting the way we look at art, okay? Okay, all right, I wanted to talk definitely about Wafa Bilal. I had the privilege of bringing Wafa Bilal to CCM, to my school, to talk about his artworks, and what a dramatic presentation. Okay, let me just show you two artwork that he's done. He's a performance artist, okay? And he is of Iraqi descent. So right away, that is going to, he says that it presents opportunities and it also presents conflict immediately when people see who he is, right? Especially in the current political environment. So this one is a performance. It was a 24-hour tattoo performance that commemorates casualties in the still present Iraqi conflicts, okay? Now, what happens when I just tell you what it is, that's fine, but if you were in the gallery during the 24 hours that this happened, you'd have a different experience, okay? Because this person is getting tattoos on his back forever and making that the artwork. He's using his own flesh as the canvas. So now what could be important enough that you're putting it on your own back, right? So if you notice, he's got an actual map of Iraq sketched out initially on his back, and he basically put in black ink the location names, and as you can see in Arabic right there. In red ink dots were the American casualties of the conflict, and in green UV ink dots was the Iraqi casualties of conflict, okay? I put the numbers in there too, and he's doing it in this specific way to make sure if you're seeing it while he's doing the performance or even afterwards, you're able to see, if you notice, all of the red dots, and it's really dramatic. It looks like it hurt, you know, to get those in there. You're seeing all the American casualties. With the image on the right, you're seeing that only under UV light can you see the Iraqi casualties. Now, I hope we can see a little bit about what the comment is here, that basically the American casualties are usually the only ones that get any press, that anybody actually knows anything about. The big thing, and I do put this as a detail down there because he does talk about it when he talks about the artwork, is that one of those UV dots for Iraqi casualties was his brother, right? So now this adds an extra personal dimension to this artwork as well. One of those dots is his brother. I mean, that is a commemoration like I've never seen before, right? A personal memorial. So all of this brings together these incredible ideas about what it means to Americans and Iraqis, this whole conflict in the first place, right? What do we know about it? How do we know things about it? And is it personal? Well, maybe for us, that we've never had somebody, a military person from America that's ever died in it, maybe it's not personal to you. It is for people like him, right? Okay, so really dramatic. And if you think that's dramatic, one of the other projects he's done, this was a 30-day performance where Mr. Bilal locked himself in the gallery, right? So it was actually at a specific gallery. He locked himself in there with a paintball machine that was rigged up to shoot at any time, as long as you knew the URL to log in and actually fire it yourself. And now when I say you, I mean all of you on this Zoom call, anybody could do it. He had a terminal, a computer terminal set up in the gallery, so you could do it right there. But also when you're sitting in the comfort of your own home, you could log into that and tell this paintball gun that you're looking at right there to shoot him. Okay, anybody been shot by a paintball before in this room?
Oh, it hurts.
Okay, it hurts. It's not fatal, right? Unless I guess you get hit in a very, uncomfortable area or something, but it hurts, okay? And if you notice, and I didn't give you the, he had some little blurbs of it too, but it actually makes a big noise. When you fire that thing, it's like bam, 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 bam. So he said when he was in here that it really felt like he was getting shot. It really felt psychologically like he was getting shot by a real gun, okay? Now he stayed in there for 30 days. Now, the project is called Domestic Tension, but he nicknamed it himself Shoot an Iraqi, okay? So when you go onto this website, you're confronted with those words. So I usually ask my classroom, I won't ask all of us because it's okay. How many people would shoot him? This is, and I'm not asking you to answer, this is a tough question. When it says shoot an Iraqi on the screen, does that make people want to log in and shoot an Iraqi person? Some people would probably say, yes, definitely. Some people would say, no, never. And the rest of us are sitting here wondering what the question is about, right? So you actually get to shoot him and he's going to sit in there and you can see he's kind of dodging it right here. But look at the yellow on the walls from those paintballs. He said one time he actually had to call a computer expert into there because the website, the URL got jammed because so many people were shooting at once from around the world, okay? Now, I just think that this is mainly about the ideas here of shooting another person, but it's also just about what you think about another person that's entirely on the different side of the planet. They have different experiences from you. Why would we necessarily go in and shoot Iraqis? Okay, I'll leave it with that because I think that's a dramatic question, right? It's about the war, it's about the conflict, but it's about personal business too. There's actually, if you're in the gallery, there's a person standing right there. You're going to go up and shoot that person? I mean, this is a tough question. Okay. Very interesting person when he came to speak to us about these projects.
If we were in the 60s, then it would be shoot a Russian.
Yeah, right. You could definitely make that switch and kind of use the same metaphor. It's almost like why do you think certain things about this person just because they told you they're an Iraqi or a Russian or something like that, right? This is the most confrontational project I've ever seen, and it actually doesn't mean anything for you. It's all him. You're shooting him,
Well, this also kind of reminds me of like Stanley Milgram's Shock Box back in the 50s or 60s, where he would see like how far people would take it, like to the point of, giving someone a lethal dosage of electricity.
Yeah.
Like if you're not seeing them or you're not directly there with them, how far can you remove yourself from, sort of the consequences of it?
Right.
Like how far you take it if you're not directly impacted by what's happening.
And one other major thing to add to that, I don't know if you've ever seen or followed Marina Abramovich, who's relatively famous now as a performance artist. I think it was 1975. She did a project called Rhythm Zero. she stood in a room, she put a bunch of objects on a table, and she said, for the next 6 hours of this gallery, just treat me as an object and not a subject. That means you can do whatever you want to me. I'm just going to be there like another object on the table. And she did put things like a loaded gun, razor blades, a rose, grapes, stuff like this. So inert things, but then very problematic things. And she said it ended up being that the gallery ran in and stopped the whole thing because it was about what people were going to get away with, right? If you can treat somebody like an object and be okay with that in your mind, do you have the right then to just kill that thing because it's just a thing? It's not a person anymore. So that kind of, it's about this too, right? Like this project is about that. If it's just an anonymous person in Iraq, do you care if they die? But if this is now a person in front of you, do you care? So again,
well, didn't Shia LaBeouf do something too, and they had to call it off very early in the
maybe I'm not sure if I know his project, but
yeah, it was in a gallery, I think in LA, and I feel like it was meant to go for for 6 days, and they made it through the first day because people started like physically assaulting him.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'll look that up, see if I can find the one you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, I find this one, I mean, yeah, this one is a lot more about a specific conflict, and it sounds like that one and Marina Abramovich was kind of just this idea of, can you suspend your disbelief and make a person an object, and would you ever want to do that, right? Yeah, okay. All right, so again, that wasn't meant to completely blow your minds, but art is not just painting anymore, it is a concept, right? And it's okay if all of us in this room don't think of art as a concept or an idea anymore. The fact remains that art has been produced for a long time, and there was always a concept at the heart of every art piece ever. Now we're just kind of separating the product off and saying, can the concept be art in itself? Again, I don't ask that question directed unless we're going to have a deep conversation about it, because it's a tough one. You don't have to think of something as art or fine art, but let's push it, let's pull it back a notch and talk about this kind of idea of hyper commercialization of art. I say, does art sell or does art sell out? We all know what a sellout is, right? So let me introduce a couple of examples of how this thing is kind of unfolding. All right, I purposely just put screen caps of YouTube videos on this page just so you could see how popular or how pop art-ish a person like Takashi Murakami has become, okay? So Takashi Murakami, if you follow my mouse, that would be him up here in this crazy costume, and that's also him down here in the lesser of the crazy costumes, okay? Takashi Murakami, just on this page, is involved with, on the upper right, directing a Billie Eilish video. So I assume we know who Billie Eilish is. If we don't, she just won the Grammy for Best Album last year, this present year. One of the biggest pop stars you could find, and he's directing her music video. On the upper left, what he is doing there is opening his bar Zingaru and making it's a burger joint. It's a pop-up burger joint, okay? And on the bottom left, you can actually see him discussing his artworks with the producer, Pharrell Williams. Okay, so I want to just put these 3 images up there because a lot of people, well, especially kind of more conservative art fans, don't think that this person, this artist, should be anywhere around these pop or popular art figures, right? That's okay. It's okay, especially we've had artists direct music videos in the past, but this is a certain extent of popular art and kind of popular culture that we may not have seen yet. And let me show you what that looks like in an artwork. Okay, so this is Takashi Murakami's, a couple of his pieces or exhibitions in the Chateau of Versailles. I think many of us have heard of Versailles before, or maybe even been. It's a very famous Baroque era chateau from the 1600s in France, and it's tied to Louis XIV, the Sun King, right? So that's the chateau we are in, and Murakami, like you can see with these 3 pieces, is known for these manga or comic kind of inspired pop sculptures. See, that's what he's known for in this case. I say that the exhibition was a bit controversial because of maybe these two questions, and they're reverse questions, right? Would you want to see manga sculptures like this during your visit to a Baroque chateau? Let's say you went to Paris on holiday, you went to Versailles on a day trip, and you're confronted with these manga sculptures. So that's a question. Also, if you love manga sculptures, are you going to travel to France, to Versailles Chateau, to see these manga sculptures? So with those two questions, I can kind of open those to us, but I almost want you more to think about how you would answer these questions, right? Would anybody that went to a Baroque chateau be pleased to see these? Or would you not be so pleased? Would you rather prefer this Roman bust here on the upper left instead of this pop art bust? And the question actually is, because I know the answer most of the time, why do you prefer the classical busts over the pop art busts? Is this kind of a problem? And let me open the chat just so I can say too. All right, so we got a lot of no's. No, 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 right? I think that's in answering the first question, right? But maybe also the second. So we got, yeah, absolutely. The idea behind showing you this project is that I think that art, especially when we're just talking about the sculpture media in itself, right? Art is not, and it doesn't just have one set of rules, right? So let's say that the upper left is a classical sculpture from 500 years ago or more. It's prescribed by the rules of its own time period and its own art style. We could definitely make the argument that the manga sculptures here are going by different prescriptions, right? In the year 2010 all the way up to 2021. And maybe that was spurred on by people like Andy Warhol in the 60s. But pop art is art to a great many people in the world, right? So it's not that we are basically saying, and when we're looking at this, that that one doesn't belong and this one does. It's the schism, right? It's the juxtaposition of watching those things basically face in the same space. And that was really what most of the people that saw this exhibition said. They said, I don't want you to give me that kind of schism. You know, like, I don't want to have to decide which one's fine art and which one's a joke, right? You have the right to think that the classical sculpture is a joke. In my mind, I teach enough about Roman sculptures that some of them are a joke, right? Some of them are meant to be that. So again, it is, yeah, again, in the comments, it is a startling juxtaposition. If you were, let me give you one more example. I think it's piggybacking right here. Oops, sorry, that was in the chat. Okay, so if there's anybody that's going to spark a little bit of conversation, it's Jeff Koons, okay? So I wanted to show you this one, similar situation where Jeff Koons and this massive magenta balloon dog on the right, he put that directly in Versailles as well. And I take an actual quote from that people coming out of that exhibition. They said it was sullying of the most sacred aspects of our heritage and identity, an outrage to Marie Antoinette. I think that's funny because obviously that person didn't know who Marie Antoinette was because she was quite outrageous, right? This is kind of what is, it's interesting to me when you look at pieces like this, and the Takashi Murakami on one hand, the Jeff Koons on another. Whether, I should say it this way, it's okay if you like or dislike either artist, but it's really this idea of that we can have art in conversation with each other that is maybe most interesting about those pieces. If you shift your gaze over here to the left-hand image though, now we're talking again big bucks for something that some people have said that there is nothing at all to, okay? So this one, 2019, the $91 million rabbit. Okay, so this thing is 3 feet tall, made out of stainless steel and kind of made to look like a balloon. If you can see a little bit of the puckering like up here on the left, you can see it's maybe supposed to be a balloon animal that was then made into steel, right? So, I mean, I always ask the question somewhat joking, who wants to pay $91 million for this thing and put it in their house or their gallery? Usually there's no takers, that's fine. Right? The problem with Jeff Koons' art in the past is that most people say that it's not done for any specific reason but to make money. Okay, so that's why, again, if Jeff Koons continues to keep making art and wanting large sums of money for this, or I guess not wanting, he gets it. right? He gets that sum of money, whether he wants it or not. But if you continued making things like this, yeah, and shock sells, but also some people are saying that, well, this is just a rabbit, a balloon animal rabbit. Is that shocking at all? Right? So this, a lot of people have a problem with Koons because they say nothing sells, right? Now it's just nothing. It's a kid's toy that's selling for 91 million. I have another couple of examples that will ask that question, but Jeff Koons is an interesting example because of this next project that you may have seen unfold. Okay. Anybody follow this controversy? I'm just curious because it just basically happened in the last couple of years. So the idea here is that Jeff Koons, and it's kind of weird, he said like he donated the idea of this sculpture that you see with him on the left, and I had to put this picture on there because he looks basically like a snake oil salesman, right? On the left, basically presenting his thing. Okay, but if you're reading along with me at the top there, this is supposed to be a commemoration of the terrorist attacks in Paris. So some people looked at him with his big grin and his big this and saying, you're commemorating dead people, man. You know, like maybe have some respect. That's what people say, okay? It ended up costing about 3.5 million euros. And again, he said that he was just donating the idea. I guess he put in $1 million of his own money. I mean, he's got $1 million now with that $91 million rabbit. People immediately came out in condemnation of this whole idea, right? And I put this good quote from the artists and cultural figures that were signatories on this thing to the city of Paris. And so again, right there, it says, we appreciate gifts, but ones that are free, unconditional, and without ulterior motives. They cited his closeness with luxury brands, and they said, this installation in such a prominent location would amount to product placement. Okay, so now if we think that that's just people overblowing it or not, that's what the French thought when they looked at this big bouquet of tulips. They said, okay, this is Jeff Koons just imposing himself on us and calling it a commemoration of dead people from terrorist attacks, right? And I did want to put this last bit in there. It was installed, okay? So you can have in a public art project like this, sometimes you can have as many petitions as you want, but when it came down to it, it is now installed, and I show you the picture of the unveiling right there too. And even the top culture official of Paris that oversaw this whole thing had this to say: it's so kitsch, it's so American. Okay, I'll just leave you with that, because has a memorial to terrorist attacks ever been called kitsch or American before? You know, or just both of those in the same sentence? It's a very tough one. So that, I think that's just kind of an interesting way to look at Koons' work, but he's problematic. Okay. Speaking of problematic, now this is a question that does need to be asked. So if we're talking about the consumerization of art, the question, you don't even have to bother reading this whole thing. The question to you is, do you think that Instagram captures are fine? Okay. Maybe what do we think about that? That's a good question to pose. What you're looking at on the bottom right is an in-gallery picture of Richard Prince's new portraits. Those are screen grabs from Instagram, where the artist has basically taken and removed the captions and changed them and blown them up and printed them out on these massive inkjet printers and sold them. And as you can see here, for up to $100,000 at the New York Frieze Art Fair. Good question for maybe just like a quick poll. Do you think that Instagram screen caps are fine art? Do you think that they should be sold as such? And do you think that they are worthwhile in today's environment? Again, this was 2014, but it might as well be today.
Well, I think it depends on who is doing the, you know, whether he's actually taking the pictures for Instagram or if he's stealing other people's pictures, because it looks like one of them said they, her pictures sold for $90,000. So was she even aware that he was using it? Because
she was not aware.
Yeah, see, because it could be comparable to photography. Photography is a recognized art, but if you're actually stealing, I mean, to me, this is stealing.
Yeah, and a lot of people have said that too, and I see in the chat, did he buy the rights? particular thing about Instagram is it's public. You give away your rights when you post something on Instagram. So that's kind of a problem, because then I agree with your question. Is this stealing? You could say by, at least right now, legally, this is not stealing what he's done. So let's say if we move past the legal implications, is an Instagram screen cap fine art for you? And it's okay if it is or isn't, and we can think about it more, but yeah, go ahead.
I think, I'm sorry, in 2014, Instagram was a lot more novel, I guess, than it is today.
Yep. But
also, it's not just that he's doing screen grabs, it's that he's curating the images.
Mm-hmm.
I assume he's not just taking screenshots of his timeline and, just blowing all of those up from one day when he was bored. These are very specific images that, maybe spoke to him. I think the one on the far right is Nikki Sixx. I mean, that's a very,
I think so too, yeah.
But if you look at them, each one sort of has a theme. The girl with the grapefruit, the girl drinking, Nikki Sixx in his original makeup. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're very curated, but also, taking the images of people that you don't know. I mean, that's very much like what taking photographs of street scenes are, of taking photographs of people, at Fashion Week, all of the street fashion. It's very similar to me in that sense.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a couple of people chiming in on the chat too. Again, I'm not a legal expert too, and I'm sure that probably there are some implications that I don't know about that are legal. In this case, or at least in 2014 when this happened, nobody was able to legally sue about this issue at the moment, and now maybe that's changed. And I do agree there was one, if somebody was to take your images and then sell them for profit somewhere else. But again, remember, doesn't art fall in between the cracks, right? So if I make these screen caps into art and put them on the wall, then you still wouldn't have copyright infringement. But then the moment somebody pays for it, then maybe that is the for-profit problem. So again, I don't have the answers, but this made it weird, right? This made Instagram and these ideas where you can immediately take pictures or make your own art, put them out there, and immediately lose the rights to them. So again, some of these artists people are currently not very pleased with, but that doesn't stop them from taking the $100,000 for each one of these pictures, right? The other thing, and you mentioned that Instagram was kind of fledgling in 2014, because that is just one of the last ones I wanted to talk about there with this issue, is Amalia Ullman's Excellences and Perfections Instagram performance art piece. Okay. Now you can see I've tried to make this image on the screen look like our modern computers. Basically, when you boot them up, you're seeing all of these, you're getting barraged, with all of these images. This is an artist that told nobody she was an artist when she launched an Instagram account and went about her life. And this was actually kind of an interesting one too, because she's playing with ideas of female image, right? And co-opted imagery too. I think you can see in one of these pictures that she said, I think on her Instagram account, that she was going to get a breast augmentation, and people were like following along that she was going to do this, and they don't know if she really did it or not, because again, Instagram is, to say that it's not real and not fake is kind of a good thing to note now in 2021. But again, remember 7 years ago, if you can, the weirdness about social media. Again, if you just read what Amalia Ullman said on the bottom there, the idea was to bring fiction to a platform that has been designed for supposedly authentic behavior, interactions, and content. The intention was to prove how easy an audience can be manipulated, essentially, right? I think people ask me as an art history professor all the time, do I think this is art, and do I think it's good art? I always respond to something like this too, that when I see the value in making the statement and talking about these issues, then I do appreciate it. Would I go out and try to find this and buy it? Like again, an Instagram performance is almost perfect because you can't buy it. this is impossible to own as an artwork, it now remains just in the intellectual sphere. So whether you think she's talking about an issue that isn't intellectual, that's one thing, right? But this only exists as a thought experiment, essentially. I think it's really interesting that back in 2014, that she was living in that line between authentic and non-authentic, right? So like this idea that all of this is fake, but still all of these pictures are still of a real person out there too, right? So we have to admit that the idea kind of fake and real, and again, the non-frangible tokens idea, all of this stuff is really kind of important, right? When you're starting to talk about what is a tangible thing, what is not tangible. And in art, does it have to be tangible, right? All of us probably in this room, and if you can kudos, but most of us can't go out and spend that $110 million on a Basquiat, right? Isn't this more of a democratic art form where it kind of can belong to all of us and we can participate if we want to and we don't have to? I mean, to me, that's an interesting idea, and that's usually where I go with projects like this too. So whether you like it or not, it happens, and it happened. I think for 2014, for 7 years ago, I would have liked to have known about this project while it was happening, right? So we could talk about it in its contemporary environment. Now it feels like 2014 is just so long ago that, oh my gosh, she faked an internet performance, so it's done every day nowadays. Okay, and then the last section of things to talk about, I included a couple of YouTube embedded videos in here so we can do what I expect that most people do, and that's have enjoyment with art. I always phrase it like this. Art over the course of human history since it's been made has at least had as a bit part to it enjoyment, right? So there's plenty of scholars that have talked about this, that sometimes when you go into an art gallery or when you're just at home looking around your own gallery, sometimes you just want to look at something and just be happy, right? You want to enjoy that artwork. You want something to be beautiful. If you don't need beauty with all of your art, that's completely okay. But at least in a bit part, art has always provided a little bit of that entertainment / enjoyment or experience value, right? So I bring this up because there are now, and I think it was just a matter of time before it came back into the sphere of all of us. There are art projects that you would say are actually not really about much of anything besides the experience that you're able to have with them, okay? And I definitely had to put this in a subcategory because the next few things that I'll show you, they're not going to be a painting on the wall that you just look at, okay? And I hope you enjoy these too. They are important things that have happened, and I definitely want to lead off with this image. Okay, what does everybody see here? Is that art?
Yeah.
Okay, so Maurizio Cattelan, I kind of just love that this person exists out there in the world. Now, I'm not here to tell you that this is great art or even that it's a great statement, but this is his work called America. From 2016 to 2019, this was a 24 karat gold functioning toilet, okay? Functioning toilet, I'll come back to in a second, is important, all right? It was installed in the restrooms at the Guggenheim, okay? I'm going to get back to that Trump thought here too, because there is a Trump thing in this project, okay? It was installed at the Guggenheim Museum. You could say that the Guggenheim in New York is maybe top 10 museums in the world. So you're going to go into this, look at your art, you go into the bathroom and there's an art piece in the bathroom. Oh, cool. Now you have to go and we're all asking the question, right? Are you going to use that toilet? I can't answer that because it actually went on exhibition at Blenheim Palace in the UK and it was stolen. This no longer is anywhere, okay? Well, it's in somebody's house and they're probably using it, but we don't get to answer that question anymore because it's gone. The Trumpism thing in there too is that President Donald Trump, and I'm not making any political statements, desired a piece from the Guggenheim for the White House. The Guggenheim responded with, you can take this piece called America from Maurizio Cattelan. I will end with that. That's basically what happened. He politely declined to have this piece, but that was kind of an interesting little side note. Okay. I think I wanted to put this statement in there too. One of these gallerists said, Catalan is one of the great post-Duchampian artists and a smartass too. Okay, smartass, yes. But do we all know who Marcel Duchamp is? We probably don't in this room, and that's okay. Marcel Duchamp did this work. Okay, this was 1917, and it actually, this one also got stolen, so it had to be replaced. It's like people in stealing toilets, I guess, right? It was called Fountain, and it was indeed a urinal. Marcel Duchamp submitted this to the art show of the Society of Independent Artists in America in 1917. All you had to have was $5 for the entry fee, and you had to submit a piece of art. There were no other directions. Do you think that this fountain got accepted into their art show? Anybody say yes? Anybody say no? No. Okay, it did not get accepted. So in 1917, his own society that Marcel Duchamp was involved in, they neglected to take this into an art show. They said that this fountain or a urinal is not art. So take that for what it is. In 1917, they said, nope, not art, sorry. Now, the Guggenheim proudly basically put this carrot gold toilet in their restroom. So is it weird of me then to say that in 2016, a toilet is art, but in 1917, it was not considered art? Isn't that an interesting conversation to have? When did it happen then? When in that 100 years did we decide that toilets could be art, right? The significance to the choice, the Armad, is it's kind of debated. It was just this kind of pseudonym. He just didn't want to put his real name on it. So I don't think that there was an actual thing behind that name, but yeah, when you make them of gold, they're art. Yeah, and some people say that too, like, sure, if it was made out of gold, then it'd be worth that much. So this one is, I guess. So again, it was stolen before I think they could actually put it on the market. I would love to know if this would sell for more than Kuhn's rabbit, right? Probably would. But would you use it? You know, like, would you go into the museum bathroom, would you use this toilet? I guess I'll just leave it with that, okay? All right, one of my favorite things that just happened right before COVID happened, right? When we could, in these pictures on the left here, when you could still go out and see art shows and kind of be, you know, a little bit cavalier with your personal space. This comes from Art Basel in Miami in 2019, and Maurizio Catalan entered a piece. It was called Comedian, and you see it there right on the, well, it's in the center of the screen. That would be a banana installed on the wall, okay? It's got a very interesting story that happens with it too. Okay, so I thought it was immediately interesting that, okay, this is the problem created by an artwork like this immediately. The gallerist that was responsible for installing this, basically, and making sure it happened, was Emmanuel Perrotin. He said, comedian is a symbol of global trade, a double entendre, as well as a classic device for humor. The artist, Maurizio Catalan, said, the banana is supposed to be a banana. Okay, I hope you can see the wide divide between what the gallerist said and the artist said, okay? I don't know, again, it may be just like that prior quote, maybe Catalan is just a smartass. Maybe that's his role in the art world. Maybe he is. I mean, I had a student write a paper about this, and they kind of uncovered several good critiques. Like this might have been a critique on the idea of banana republics, right? And this whole idea that in Caribbean and South American countries that it could be a colonial kind of thing behind it. Sure, and I admit that it can be about that, but again, look right here. The banana is supposed to be a banana. Don't look any further, is what the artist said. Okay. This was an edition of 3, I should say as well. 2 of the editions of the 3 sold for $120,000 at the fair, okay? After they were sold, and we do have the names of the people that bought them, and they gave various reasons, like I just wanted to be, once the buzz came about this, so I just wanted to be involved, right? And this guy right here, so you see him on the right, so David Datuna was a known performance artist. He did not buy the bananas. He did not buy Comedian, I should say, the art piece. He just showed up and he ate it. So to me, extremely clever. He called his performance piece The Hungry Artist, and I like that, double entendre there as well. Is that the most expensive meal of all time? Again, who knows? I mean, the people in the Baroque era probably partied a lot hardier than we know today. But for a single banana, it's kind of very interesting that this was then ingested. Of course, it was put right back up because the artist specified that the Comedian art piece would be replenished whenever necessary, right? So David Datuna didn't eat $120,000, but he did eat an art piece. He destroyed an art piece worth $120,000, right? Even though it got replaced. So what they also said is they had to almost remove this piece as soon as it went in there, because if you notice that picture on the left there, this was before COVID, so you have to suspend your disbelief, but they said there were so many people that were basically swarming this artwork that it was getting unsafe. So they actually had to remove it from the whole show. How do you take the purchase home? That's interesting because, again, two different parties bought this. So I think because it was specified that it was a banana to be replenished, that means he said that he actually went down the street to the grocery store and bought bananas for 30 cents. So that means that the banana in duct tape, you as the owner of it can just go to the store and get another one. It's still a part of that artwork. So again, I'm not here to just make fun of this. It's more about the statement. If a toilet is art, why is a banana not art? That's a pretty simple question. Not a simple answer, but it's a simple question to ask, right? So the reason I include this here is because I think that art as a spectacle, do you think that many people necessarily would have been involved in that art fair in Miami, the Art Basel, if something like this wasn't likely to happen? I think, is it good for art? I think yes, but I am welcome to anybody saying that, no, this is not good for art. It does make, some people say it has made a joke of art. I think it's good for art. Maybe some of the other pieces that I'll show you quick now are a little bit better in the spectacular type of vein. But again, this happened and I like to talk about it. One of my students 3D printed a banana and came into class and put it on the wall and asked me if I wanted to pay 120 grand for it. Of course I said yes, so. Oh. Okay. All right, let's play this video. Anybody heard of Yayoi Kusama? Probably the single most famous artist in the world right now. She's currently got it's at the New York Botanical Gardens in I think the Bronx. She's got a new exhibit. I tried to get into one of her exhibits, these infinity rooms that I'll show you in a second, when I was in Miami, and they said that there was like a 3-month waiting list there. Okay. When it came to New York City, I think it was at the Gagosian galleries, people routinely suggested that they're waiting like 3-4 hours in line to go in to see these. You cannot, to my knowledge, buy these as an art piece, but the actual kind of entry fees and things like that probably makes her maybe one of the highest earning artists in the world today without actually selling a whole lot of pieces, right? So I'll play this and kind of enjoy this. Again, I could throw around art history terms like trompe l'oeil, mirrored manipulation, but this is about a singular experience that you can have with an artwork. Okay, so this is a really good video. It shows you a couple of the different things she has displayed over the years. If you notice, some of them are actually you just peering through a little window. Okay, what I can say about that too, do you notice that the one thing that ruins the entire illusion for you is actually that other person, the photographer in this case, is in the room, and you're kind of like, can you get out of this room? I don't want to see the camera. I don't want to see anything. I think that says a lot about how these art projects work, right? It is absolutely, when you go in here, you wait in a few hours or whatever it takes, you go in the room, you shut the door behind you, and you have an experience with the art that is only belonging to you, right? So even if another person like a photographer is in there like that, you feel like it's a disruption of your experience. So, and yeah, I'm not sure if she had a piece in the North Carolina Museum of Art. I would probably say yes, without even knowing, because usually these projects, an infinity room like this can travel very easily. So I know a friend in Texas that saw the pumpkins one as well. So they are out there and they're all over the place. It's just a lot of the times if you can make an appointment or something like that to get in and see something like this. So I would say that, again, almost like the Takashi Murakami pieces, there is a little bit to say that there's a pop art sensibility to this. There is a little bit of a scientific manipulation in the mirrors and everything that's in there. But if I start analyzing these from a traditional art history perspective, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, right? This is truly about the enjoyment factor, the experience factor. And that's really where a lot of these artists are moving into. Okay. This is an interesting project too. I just missed this when it was in LA. This is when it was at MoMA. So let me show you this and let's start here. This is called the Rain Room. Anybody ever been in this one? It swept the whole country for a couple of years and it was very, very popular. I like that they show you all the people waiting in line. So I think you can get the picture of it here. This is a project that makes you suspend your disbelief, right? So there have been paintings and artworks for a long time that have basically made you, and let's see, I'll just pause it so I can make sure. All right, so you can hear me. Look at it this way, every single painting you've ever seen is tricking your eye, right? Because there's that famous experiment when you are looking at the Washington crossing the Delaware, you're not actually looking at Washington crossing the Delaware, you're looking at a bunch of paint, right? So there is that suspension of disbelief when we're looking at art that you are getting tricked, okay? This art project tricks you, okay? This actually truthfully does it. You are looking at a room inside of a museum that there is rain coming from the ceiling. And I get it, water, right? But there's rain coming from the ceiling. What happens when you walk out in the rain? Well, you know, we're intelligent people, you're going to get wet. As you can see, all these people, they're using sensors above and below that turn off that single drop of rain coming down, and you are not getting rained on. You could basically do all this. You're not getting rained on when you're standing in the middle. Where I say that this is about suspending your disbelief too is because you saw in here, there are some people that will walk right through it. Some people stand on the sidelines of this art piece. You know, they got all the way here, they're looking at it, and they won't walk into it because they're worried about getting wet. Right. So it's, to me, this is kind of like a mind experience, you know, that's kind of very interesting. Okay. So I would love, I mean, would you go into this? The question is kind of valid, right? Because some people, let's say you have your Balenciaga shoes on or something like that, and you really don't want to get something wet in a museum. And could you imagine if you got wet in a museum, what are you going to do with the rest of your day, right? There's people that have those types of intelligent questions going on. So is it worth it to you to step into this rain room? But anybody say yes, I'd go into that?
Oh, yes.
Anybody know?
How wet would you get?
You wouldn't get wet at all, technically. I mean, they were saying that sometimes if you were moving really fast and you could kind of mess with the sensors, maybe you could get a drop on your finger or something. But if you notice, if I play it again, nobody's getting anything wet. See that?
I would definitely do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you're standing there on the sidelines, you don't know if you're going to get wet or not, right? So it's like it's this really interesting thing that you're so scared that you're not going to get wet or get wet that it kind of stops you from having an experience. I would say probably 100% of the people that come here end up going in, because why wouldn't you if you knew you weren't going to get wet? Okay, so to me, that's really interesting. That straddles the line too between an art piece or a thought experiment, I guess, and a real experiential art project, right? So if I just tell you it's only about the concept, it's only about you having fun in an art piece, then I think we'd all say, yeah, you know what, I'll go in there. So, but it's, I hate showing videos of it because I really want to be in that space. And so essentially that artist has then succeeded, right? Okay, I wanted to show you this one as well. This one's called Transient Rainbow. And let me show you what happens first, and then I'll just mention kind of something about it. Okay, they show you a little of the process.
The bottom left side does.
Usually the overlap. I put the half second in there.
Okay, the reason I like to show this too is that I think that there's several different aspects of a project like this. For one, I say, and I say it right at the bottom here, this is the ultimate attempt at ephemerality. So what I mean is that if you weren't there that exact day in 2002 on the East River, you didn't get to witness this, right? It was there and it was gone. And I like that fireworks are used as the medium because there almost can't be a more ephemeral piece of art media than a firework, right? Or something like Saigo Cheng, this artist, sometimes works with gunpowder as well. So that's almost the only way you could be more ephemeral is a gunshot blast. So he sometimes uses that as well, not in that way, but more just using the gunpowder on paper. So this is the ultimate attempt at how small of an art project can you actually make that has this kind of impact. The other thing I mentioned as well, I think using fireworks like this taps into a nostalgia that is deep in a lot of our heads too. You could hear the people in the video oohing and eyeing because that's what we do when we saw fireworks, let's say when we were kids. And even if you've never seen fireworks before, this is just a straight, beautiful statement of something, of a rainbow, of different colors. It has booming in the sky. It's enough to kind of make you take notice. It's a really interesting way, and he sometimes has said about his artwork, to paint the sky, right? So basically with using all these different colors and compositional elements, this is a painting, but a painting across the sky that is gone as soon as it appears, right? So again, if we're talking about experiential art, Saiguo Chang's work is definitely at the top of the list. I didn't make mention of it here, but there's a project of his called Sky Ladder. There's a Netflix documentary that's on there, and I suggest you all watch it. So on Netflix, it's called Sky Ladder by Saiguo Chang. It's about bringing a project like this actually into the world, and all the social political barriers that actually get in the way. Okay, last artist, two projects from this last artist I just wanted to show, and then I can stop talking for a little bit if you want. All right, so Olafur Eliasson is a Danish artist. This one is really quite interesting. Okay, so you can see here, it's called Your Color Memory, and this is actually using what I guess I would call a technological background to it. Okay, what you do is you walk into this room, it's nothing but white surfaces in the first place, and there is one light tone or one color tone that's projected for 30 seconds. Okay, simple, that's all it is. When exposed to 30 seconds of only one light tone, our eyes create a unique complementary color after image after about 15 seconds. But they were saying there is no timer that starts in your head. So it's about 15 seconds, you will create the complementary after image in your eyes, okay? So this room projects the different color tone and it stops after 30 seconds and switches to another color, okay? So hopefully you follow me when I say this. Not a single person will ever be seeing the same color when they enter this room. Do you see what I mean by that? So that's why this is, I keep on saying the same phrase, that I don't know if there could be a better artwork for the experience just that you're having at one time, but this is it, right? So this person maybe on the upper right, they're entering the room when it's an orange hue, but it depends on how long they then stay in the room when they start creating the opposite, which I believe complementary to orange is blue, right? So they're gonna see a little bit of blue after image with the orange image in front of them, but then what if that snap changes into this magenta at the bottom? Every single person is having a different experience at the same time, which I really, really like about a project like this. So again, pure experience, pure one-person experience. And let me end with this one because it's just about as contemporary as you can get. It was yesterday, okay? Olafur Eliasson, the artist that I just said, you can even see Kate Brown 1 day ago, this was written, okay? So he flooded Switzerland's fanciest museum, which I can't verify, with pond water and invited wildlife inside. So this is another one of those very experiential artworks. He took the pond that already existed outside of the museum and allowed it to flood in through the museum by removing the glass panels that you can see they were right down here at the front of the museum. He removed the glass panels, which allowed all of the water, and let's call it wildlife, or even like he titles his project, the life outside of the museum is now inside the museum. So they're leaving those panels off. It's going to be open until July 24/7. So I don't know how they're handling ticket prices or anything like that, but the museum has been turned into wildlife, right? So you can see that to enhance the effect, he's used this, and I've never heard of it before, uranine. It's a non-toxic dye that he's used before, and it's this green color that you're seeing as well. So it kind of enhances the effect of this this idea that a real pond outside with a kind of tinged green color like that. And you have plenty of those swamps close to the Carolinas too, right? So it kind of looks like this big swampy pond area has now been influxed into the museum. And as you can see, there's nothing on the gallery walls. What you are looking at here is the artwork. So that means that this is an art experience. I do like the little quote that they put in here at the bottom, if you see that. What is surprising is the great variations of emotions, reflections, and interactions of visitors. The COVID crisis has revealed new layers of meaning and has made obvious how strongly our lives are entangled with other humans and non-humans, meaning wildlife, right? So I like that there's an attempt to tie this into the COVID crisis. And now that everything is opening back up, like a museum like this, it truly is opening back up, right? It literally is opening the whole museum to everybody. So we can kind of intermingle with the people and the nature that we haven't gotten to see for over a year now. So I think this is a really good spectacular piece of experiential art, and it also brings it all the way up to the most contemporary you can get happening right now. So I think that is the last of the images I have, and I know I went a little bit far, but you assured me that that would be okay. So hopefully everything was interesting enough for you. I'll stop the share. And kind of I was just going to open that up to any additional questions that you might have or anything else. So thank you very much.
What do you think about the exhibit that's going around now, the immersive Van Gogh, which is actually taking, you know, the paintings and making it more interactive or more contemporary?
I think it's really excellent. And again, sometimes the extra serious art historians are going to scoff at something like that because it is just a reproduction, right? So like if you don't have the actual Starry Night or whatever it is, then there is something additional, right? It's a copy of a copy of a copy. So some people might scoff at the idea, but as you can see with that last part of the presentation, I appreciate these experiential art projects and I don't have any problems. Okay, let me back up. I can sometimes have problems getting students and people involved with the art. Now that project has no problem with that at all. That's involving you directly with artworks, historical artworks, in what I view as a positive way. And I think that the more people you can reach with whatever art it is, I think the better conversations we can have. And I think it's a way to get a new generation into something like that. And I just remember too, with something like Starry Night, I think when all of us probably went to college, no matter what age we are, somebody had a Starry Night poster on the wall, right? And I would like that to continue in a weird way, you know, so if there's these new Gen Zers or millennials that, you know, want to have a Starry Night poster and want to appreciate that, this is the way to get them in the door, because as one of the other topics we talked about, Instagram, right? Everybody that's in there is sharing with their friends that they did it, and this is the cool thing to do. So I'm glad about all of those aspects. So I've seen Starry Night in person myself, and I suggest we all do it, but I think something that's additional to that, like a corollary to the artwork, like an immersive exhibit, is great, and I really appreciate it. So is it as valuable as the initial art piece itself? That's a tough question, right? And because in an experiential exhibit, can't sell it, can't put a value on it. So maybe you can put an insurance value on the exhibit. So maybe there is an analog to that, but I don't know. I'm in favor of it.
Brian?
Yeah.
Does the intent of the creator have anything to do whether it's considered art or not? Because you were talking about fireworks as the artist trying to paint the sky.
Sure.
But say, for example, in Nashville, they're supposedly going to have a fantastic fireworks display on the 4th, which is more in the realm of celebratory experience rather than artistic experience. At least that's the intent. So
Sure.
Is it art, or can you distinguish between those two things?
I would say in almost like a quick answer to that, I don't think you can no longer distinguish between those things, because let me put it this way, since the 80s, at least the 1980s, at least, when we have been making commemorative structures and memorials that are made by artists and they're out in the public sphere, we already, like the good one to note is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial by Maya Lin in Washington, DC. As soon as people gazed upon that minimalist monument, right, that was an art piece first, maybe, and then almost a commemorative space second, I think we've already intermingled the idea of commemoration and artwork, and I don't know if we can ever pull them apart again. So that's why I would say that there's no distinguishing between the two. If you're interested in that kind of fireworks question, check out that documentary on the Sky Ladder that the same artist did, because that was about the problems that he ran into trying to make this sky ladder and how nobody would allow him to actually do the fireworks anywhere. And he was trying to get that sky ladder done so he could show his grandmother before she passed away, right? So it's really kind of a dramatic thing in a presentation of this, because yeah, it wasn't just an artwork to him, that was like a commemorative piece that he wanted to do and get done, and they weren't letting him do it like in certain parts of China. So watch that document, because I think that might even address your question. Can we distinguish between the commemorative celebratory aspects, and can we say that that is not art? Or do we care? I mean, do we care if fireworks are just considered painting in the sky rather than painting on the canvas? I think that adds a little bit, to art. I don't think it takes anything away, because usually that's where people have problems. If you're taking away, if you're taking value away from fine art, then it's damaging. But I don't know if those projects are, right?
No, that's very interesting. You have this expansive view of what is considered art.
Yeah.
So
I think I have to, by the nature of what I do, because I would never go into a classroom and right away say that we're only going to talk about the real art. I just can't do it. It's not in my personality and training. And it's not what the students want to hear either. So I expanded my definition of what art could be. Sometimes I shift the question. I sometimes will ask the question, not is it art or not art, but can we just say, is this good art or bad art? I'm cool with that. If you want to say that the 24 karat gold toilet is just bad art, I'm okay. You can justify whatever answer you want. I just like the Society of Independent Artists in 1917 were not. I'm not about saying and putting my foot down and saying that's not art. Sorry, pal. I can't do it. I can't tell somebody. And your first point, it's about the agency of the artist. If the artist says it's art, I'm inclined to say that it is, and agree with the agency of the artist. But again, I'm also not here to tell everybody how to feel about art, just to introduce the questions.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say it, because I think it was Andy Warhol who said, art is whatever you say it is.
Yeah.
And I was that's kind of a good quip.
Yeah. Didn't he also say either a sucker is born every 15 minutes, or the fame is, everybody gets famous for 15 minutes, probably.
All right, 15 minutes of fame, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing some of the Warhol things early on back in the 60s. I remember where I went to college, watching this movie of the Empire State Building. Mm-hmm. And I forget how long it was. It seemed like a long time. Probably wasn't as long as I thought. But it was nothing but this shot up from the ground up to the Empire State Building. And I thought to myself, is this art, or is this created just to make people talk about it? But then I thought, yeah, but even if that's true, he succeeded in what he wanted, because people talk about it. Either they like it, or they think it's terrible, or it's boring, or whatever, but it gets people talking.
Yeah, and even that's a good example too, something like that, because I teach design as well, and I come from an architecture background. So when you're talking in like 1988, I think it was, when Philip Johnson opened the deconstruction exhibition at MoMA, he's saying now architecture should be, and all of the sketches and blueprints that come along with architecture should now just be in this museum, and we shouldn't even be talking about whether it's art or not, right? So somewhat similar to like a video of the Empire State Building, and it comes along with all sorts of other baggage and other things. Like maybe you're looking at the Empire State Building and thinking about that image of the workers sitting on the I-beam. Maybe you're thinking about the King Kong movies. Everybody probably sees that and thinks something else. Some people use it as a symbol for America. Some people use it as a symbol for capitalism. You could say that the Empire State Building on a video like that is an art piece. Like the video of it is an art piece independent of the building itself, right? At least that's what I might say.
And there's also this, there's always been sort of a classical divide, I think, between art and architecture, on one hand and on the other hand. But
sure.
I think those barriers are being broken by people like Frank Gehry, who makes the building itself an experience.
Yeah.
It's not just a house, what you look at, but in itself is an experience.
Yeah,
and
it almost
either love it or you hate it. But
it almost took until 1997, the Guggenheim Bilbao, for people to admit that an architecture could be a sculpture, right? It could be a sculpture in itself.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I mean, 97. So that's only, was that 24 years ago? So the last 24 years, we basically merged those things together. I like to think that I'm right in the middle too. I have degrees in both fields. And so technically I'm pretty qualified to say I like that they're merged, right? So.
Who do you consider good architects today who are doing that, who are blending the two, art and architecture?
Oh, I just was looking up like a kind of top 10 list of buildings that have changed the world over the past couple of years. And Jean Nouvel is usually in there. I kind of like some of those projects. There's a couple other, Greg Lynn was on faculty with, Greg Lynn and Frank Gehry were both on faculty at UCLA while I was there. So, I mean, I was kind of just living in this alternate universe where they were all right there. There's there's a lot of different architects that I think are balancing those. Zaha Hadid, unfortunately passed away now, but still some of her projects are still getting made, especially in the Arabian Peninsula. There's a whole bunch of different projects like in Qatar and the Emirates that are still getting built. A lot of those that we would have called deconstructivist architects, a lot of those are really kind of merging the idea of architecture and sculpture nowadays too. There's a lot of good ones. I can give you a whole list as well.
When you were at UCLA, did you ever, I think Gary lived in Santa Monica.
Santa Monica, yep, that's where his famous
did
house
you ever see
was.
his house? It was very controversial and the neighbors hated the thing.
I did, I teach it. I teach it as well. It was called a Tijuana sausage factory by his neighbor on the legal complaint.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course I went and looked at it, had to, yeah. It used to be an old pink bungalow that was basically just exploded and put back together. Kind of interesting. I've never gotten inside though.
I remember hearing what Pablo Picasso said about people who looked at his art. He ridiculed them because he didn't consider that he was doing any serious art, and so the people who were admiring his art, he thought they were absolutely stupid.
That is interesting that you bring him up as an example too, because he's also a bit of a showman too, because when he first made his Demoiselle d'Avignon, he was too embarrassed to show even his friends. So it's like, I know that he knew he was disrupting the whole Western pictorial tradition when he was doing that, even if he kind of, maybe he like revisionist history and said maybe that the people that were looking at that were just not smart enough or sophisticated enough to experience it. I mean, you only have the disruption of a pictorial tradition happen so many times too, right? Most people say that Giotto did it in the Proto-Renaissance, and you might not have had another one come around until Picasso. I'm not trying to deify the guy. You know, there were plenty of people involved in Cubism at exactly that moment, and you could say that the Fauvist artists like Matisse and others like that were also pushing that envelope at the same time. And you don't just get to Cubism overnight too. So I think you're right to cite Picasso as an example. I think he's also a little bit of a problematic one too, because I think he knew what he was doing.
Oh yeah.
He was probably hesitant to unleash it on the world, at least at first. And I think in his lifetime, I don't think he got rich off of what he was doing either. So it still was a very courageous thing to do, I guess. And now whether I like Picasso and all of his works is an interesting idea. I think I tend towards like Guernica, the big ones that have a political bent to them being his stronger works, right? And some of his analytic cubism is kind of at the lower level events that he pulled off. But yeah, I'm glad that he happened, and I'm glad we can talk about him. He's a problematic dude for sure. I think they just put Antonio Banderas as Picasso in a TV show, I think on National Geographic too. I haven't gotten around to it, but I really should.
Well, Picasso and Duchamp also were two of the people who first brought objects to change them and sort of shock. Like Picasso was the bicycle seat and the handlebar to make a bull's head. Mm-hmm. And for Duchamp, it was the toilet.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was like people were, you know, head scratching, and they still do when these things are exhibited. Like, what the heck, you know?
Yeah. And I think the most important there was that Duchamp took his kind of show to America, right? So that's when everybody was doing things like the ash can school and things like that in America. All of a sudden they had that Armory show in New York City that opened, and all of a sudden they got slapped across the face with abstraction. And those things had to happen for America to start going into attempting to lead the art world in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, the nude descending a staircase.
Yep, I got a picture of that in my school office, because I always have to show a lot of students the moment that America realized that there were other things out there was basically nude descending a staircase. Yeah.
But somebody once said if Picasso had died in 1939, he would be remembered as even greater than he is today, because in the 50s, 60s, 70s, he produced just a lot of pot boilers.
Yeah.
And the guy early on was an incredible draftsman and a very excellent painter. And
so you're saying it's better to burn out than to fade away, right?
And he never got stuck in one rut like many artists.
I was going to say that
thing, and they keep repeating that over and over and over. But Picasso never did that, which was one of the amazing things about the guy. Was he was never afraid to break out of the bounds of what he'd been doing.
Yeah, you can also make a career of finding a rut and getting into it. Ask Mark Rothko, right?
Yeah, so. Exactly. Bernard Buffet.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
What do you think of Rothko? I mean, to me, they're interesting, but I don't spend much time looking at them.
I think
color cubes that sort of float.
Yeah, I'm okay with. I've seen a couple of them in person in general, and I thought they were kind of interesting. To me, their real worth is almost from an art therapy perspective. Like they're big in art therapy classes too, because I dare you to just sit in front of a Rothko and just not kind of just melt away a little bit and just kind of just sit there and look at it, because taking subject matter away from you and taking most of the representation away from you allows you to just put yourself into whatever you're seeing. So I like, I have, my brother has one of the prints where it's mostly orange and kind of into red and yellow tones. And then you could interpret that in a really hypnotic way. You could also go with the red and maybe make it a little bit more, kind of anger oriented. Red is also anger and love, which is kind of, so you can kind of use the color tones and all of that type of stuff and go a certain direction. Or you can really try to think about what he was doing and what he was saying, which is basically, don't look at this as all just paint. It's that I'm just giving you things, right? So like he would say, that's the yellow idea, like that's the red idea. And maybe if the yellow and red idea move into each other. So I'm not going to put more meaning on Rothko than was intended, but I would say that I'm okay with the works because they're almost meant for this more therapeutic turn with art. And I'm definitely in favor of that. That's sometimes think about the reason that you pick what you do to put in your own house. You don't want to look at a Dubuffet because a lot of the times that's an investigation in ugliness a lot of the time. So most people want to be surrounded with things that have that jouissance or whatever they call it, right? Where you can just be in love with the art, right? So I'm okay with Rothko. My brother has a couple prints, and he lives in upstate New York, so that's right where Rothko settled down too. So it's Rothko territory up there. So,
you put Jackson Pollock sort of in that same box?
Jackson Pollock, I've always thought was a little bit more aggressive to look at, because of the spontaneous paint flicking. It always just looks a little bit more animalistic. Rothko lets me kind of retreat back into just having a nice time. Pollock kind of just makes me, I'm darting across the canvas like this, and it's a different experience, but I'm okay with both of them, honestly. If I had a spare 100 million, I'd probably grab a Pollock too. Why not? Or make my own,
When was it? Like 20 years ago, somebody discovered a Jackson Pollock. I think it was actually decided that he actually did it somewhere in Southern California.
Oh, yeah, that'd be interesting. I mean, the Antiques Roadshow is it's an interesting thing to watch nowadays because people are coming out with amazing. There was one of the old Dutch masters, I think, was recently found, maybe a Rembrandt or something that was basically a small one that somebody found in the attic. That blows my mind that somebody could be so cavalier with throwing away or putting something in an attic like that, even if you didn't know what it was, but again, not everybody can identify the relative worth of certain paintings. I can't either. That's why I don't work for an auction house. I can tell you that.
But it's like the kids who saw it on grandma's wall,
Yeah,
and when it becomes theirs, it's just ugly, and stick it away.
I know. Yeah, and that's exactly, if you were hoarding anything in like the 1950s and 60s, it wasn't always just the best looking, but it sometimes ends up being really important, so.
But there was that Rembrandt project, 20, 25 years ago, where they looked at all the paintings and they decided whether they would admit them into the canon or reject them.
I don't want that job.
A lot in museums were rejected.
Yeah.
And then someone redid it. And after some of the museums deaccessioned those things that were taken out of the canon, and then they were put back in. So how would you feel if you had a painting which somebody told you it was Rembrandt, not Rembrandt, you got rid of it, and then it's Rembrandt?
Yeah, they probably run into problems like that all the time, because not every artist was so great about signing everything, and that's why they have started to reassociate a lot of paintings. Like the one big one, there's an artist called Robert Campin that was working in Flanders in like the 13th, 14th century, something like that. And they could never really find any signatures. So they've actually started to assign that instead to the workshop of the master of Flamal, right? So like this big long thing, but it's kind of the same thing you're talking about, right? So like if we have to reattribute names, take names off of paintings, and if you use the Rembrandt example, if it is a Rembrandt, okay, you got a $50 million artwork. If it's not Rembrandt, but it's made in the same time period, okay, maybe we can sell that for $1 million because it's another Dutch master. But if it's just a starving artist down the street in the style of Rembrandt, which I hate to say, it's probably somewhat easy to start, or at least approaching his style without finishing the painting off, then you got a $20 painting, So I can't imagine the mood swings from people that are in Sotheby's that do this for a living, because their living is then tied to the works that they ascribe, or the values that they ascribe to works, right? I don't want that job at all. Don't even offer me that job. No way.
And they've been fooled, because there's an infamous story, I don't know when, 20, 30 years ago, Sotheby's had a painting by Fernando Botero.
Yeah, okay, the Colombian artist.
Sort of grotesque, chubby women.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the cover lot. And then they discovered, before it came up for sale, that it actually was a fake.
Oh.
So, they get taken in,
Yeah, I think they've said too that art forgery is a huge market in itself, right? The black market art. And if you can find, well, hear me out just for a second. Isn't that funny though? If you could find somebody good enough, talented enough that could forge a Rembrandt perfectly at a finished level, shouldn't that person then be as famous as Rembrandt, right? So like, I'm curious as to how that all works, but I'm not curious enough to actually get into that. That market.
China actually has a big market doing that. And I remember a few years ago, my sister-in-law's mother had an issue, like something happened to a painting of hers. And it wasn't a famous painting or anything, but I found it to replace it. But in the US, it was going to cost me, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But I could order the same thing through China for like, less than $100.
Sure.
And I think what they do is somehow they scan it and they digitally create it on canvas. So from the computer. And she didn't know the difference. And
and most don't. I know sometimes if I'll go online and be looking for a print on canvas, sometimes it'll arrive to my house and I'll look at the canvas and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, it looks like it was painted on there. Sometimes they get the texture marks on there too. So I don't know who's doing it. They're pretty much geniuses in their own right if they can pull this off, but it is completely damaging to the art market, right? Because then, if you have $100 million swings in valuations, I mean, that is just toying with people's livelihoods, because it doesn't matter much for the original artist anymore. I mean, Rembrandt is so long gone that it, probably doesn't even have any relatives, but it's I mean, last time one of my artist friends told me is that galleries nowadays are still taking about 50% of the haul. So from something that's sold in a gallery exhibition, the artist gets 50 and the gallerists get 50%, which I think is a crazy percentage, but that's a lot of money to be toying around with, especially if you are representing that certain things are authentic and then they're not, right? Isn't this a really good argument to have for why performance art and ephemeral art is actually much more valuable as an experience because you can't sell it? You know, I like that because now that something has zero monetary value, all of its value then moves into the ether, right? It moves into like the psychological sphere. And I kind of like that too. Not to say that I don't think that Baroque paintings are as good as modern day performance art. I wouldn't say that, but that's why I continually defend the idea of new types of art, like performance art and ephemeral art and experiential art, because you can have a really good time with it. You don't have to worry about putting it on your wall at home. So.
What do you think about, and I think this came up in the chat earlier tonight, about the digital selling? You know, when you were talking about with the Instagram, I don't know
the NFTs.
Yeah.
I've only, since this is the new buzz thing, if somebody could explain the non-frangible tokens to me, go ahead. But I mean, people are offering classes on trying to tell people how to do all this stuff. So I'm not at all up to date with that.
Well, it has to do with if I create something on my computer, people buy the digital rights to that. So they actually own it, even though it's like public work and anybody can view it or whatever.
Oh, okay.
And so it doesn't make sense to me because if it's out there in the public anyway, and anybody and their brother can view it, why would you want to say that you own this digital piece? I don't know.
Yeah, well, so that's just that's Amazon Prime Video right there.
Yeah.
You know, like, so basically, because they've said that when you buy a movie from Amazon, like you buy it, you own it, right? We've always thought that you own it, but not when they've actually looked into the legal rights of this. I don't own any of the movies that I purchased on Amazon or any of that stuff too. So that might be kind of an example of what we're talking about here, where they're telling you and they're saying that you own that movie, but you do not. Or you own that copy.
People are paying like millions of dollars for these.
I think that's what I've seen too, but again, I haven't done enough research, and I don't know if I want to go down that internet rabbit hole quite yet, but maybe I should. I don't know.
Oh, Christopher just posted, you've licensed the right to view it under your terms in perpetuity.
Right. So you don't own it, but you own the rights to view it when you want to, right? So yeah, I don't know if that's the same ramifications of the NFT stuff or not, but or if he's saying that that's what the NFT means.
Well,
I'll look into that more too, especially if I need to know this going forward. I'm sure it's going to make an entry into art too pretty soon, right?
Well, I'm sure too that your students are going to have questions about it, you know, because it's like the latest trend. It's the latest contemporary art.
I was just getting into like, you know, Bitcoin and stuff like that, or not getting into it, but like trying to know more about it. And now new things, they come along every day now. So I'll get into it.
But I thought maybe the owning those, what do you call them?
NFTs. Yeah.
NFTs. It might not be that much different from the people who bought the banana. I mean,
That's true.
What did you get from buying the banana? You got being able to say you bought the banana.
Yeah. And because it's replenishable banana, you bought the idea from the artist, right? So you bought the concept from the artist. And yeah, that's what Christopher, I think, was saying, right? So like you buy the right to the idea of the comedian art piece, and you have that forever. But you don't actually own it because it's not ownable. It's unless every banana in the world is a part of the project. Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Everybody else that was there who didn't pay all that money, they know the idea just as well. Just like you say, these things are, you can view them on the internet. So nobody has any actual more accessibility to it, except for being able to say, and maybe it's like social media in a way too. It's just being able to say it.
No, you're exactly right. Yeah, because everybody that was there also has some degree of ownership over the idea, unless you surmise that the idea was not simple, right? Again, we can discuss this all day, but unless you say that maybe Maurizio Catalan, maybe his idea wasn't just the banana is a banana, it's so difficult, isn't it? Like that. That's why I like projects like that too. I mean, a lot of people get angry and just say, I don't want to talk about it. My dad did that last time I brought up the banana project. I don't want to talk about this. It's too difficult, and I'm like, well, technically this is the simplest thing ever. It's a banana on a wall. But you're exactly right, Dad. It is completely difficult to understand all the ramifications behind it. But no, I think you're right. That is interesting though too. Didn't anybody that witnessed the project have a little bit of ownership of the idea then too, if it was presumably a simple, this is just a banana idea? That's like this is not a pipe painting too, right? So if somebody tells me it's not a pipe, then my brain says, no, it's not a pipe, but I still want to think that it's a pipe, right? And we don't need to go down that rabbit hole either, but that's somewhat of a, can you own an idea by looking at it, right?
Well, and then if I duct tape a banana to my wall, can then he come after me for copyright infringement? Because I just
an interesting one too.
took his idea and have reproduced it.
Are you trying to sell yours for profit though? Because that would be the legal, right?
I could also be charging people to come in and see the banana on the wall.
Well, but Denise, what you need to do instead of regular duct tape, get like green duct tape. And that way it would now.
I was going to use painter's tape.
Yeah.
On mine.
So now it
doesn't mess up my wall.
It'd be original now because
something strong enough to hold up that banana for a long time, right? Well, not a long time.
I'll use blue and Denise can have it.
Once it rots away, you got to replace it though. So you do have to like peel back the tape, put a new one in there, right? And put it in there.
So Nancy's got the right idea with the painter's tape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to mess up my wall.
I feel like there's a really blurry line between copying or imitating and like a derivative of a work.
Right.
Because art doesn't exist in a vacuum and there are not many new ideas.
Yeah.
So like where is that line? Where does one draw that line?
Right. I mean, because the good one is the one that I brought up there too. It's like the toilet in the toilet, right? Yeah. So like is the 24 karat gold version of the toilet, is it derivative of Duchamp's fountain, or is it a copy because it is toilet to toilet, right? Well, one of them was functional, one of them was a sculpture. But no, I agree with you that is a difficult question to ask, that something that is derivative of, because you can go back in art history. You had to, in the Renaissance and anywhere along that time period, you had to prove that you could directly duplicate paintings that came before you could even move into your own creative ideas, right? Right. So
or you worked for an artist and you made work that their name got put on.
Right. So yeah, so then is your work a copy of theirs? Is it a forgery of theirs? Is it derivative of theirs? It was probably an easier question back then. Now it's a very difficult question. I agree.
I find myself thinking about this sort of space of art making a lot as my own studio practice. I'm moving into a lot of collage and photo montage work right now.
Okay.
And so there's this really interesting sort of mental gymnastics that I'm dealing with of like, how much of it can I claim as mine versus how much of it is the direct product of somebody else doing something. Mm-hmm. And how okay am I with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to the beginnings of Dada is where a lot of people peg the beginnings of like straight photo collage. Anna Hope's work, and
I'm looking at Hoch a lot.
Yeah. And her stuff was really interesting because it was like biting political commentary in a time and a place where you couldn't really do very biting political commentary, right? Yeah. So that's where it came from, and that's where. Well, and it was a little bit before that too, like, the synthetic cubism was a little bit collagey as well. But no, I agree with you, especially in our current world, where if you are taking your collage elements out of a periodical, that is owned and distributed by somebody. So can you own like a shard or a piece of the page and put it in your artwork? It's a really interesting question. Good luck getting around all of those legal ramifications, if there are any.
I'm doing a lot of research into what is considered fair use under copyright and intellectual property law. And actually Jeff Koons comes up a lot because he's had a lot of controversies with that. And then after I learned that, I realized that one of the images I used was a photograph by Jeff Koons. So I've like accidentally entangled myself in this conversation, which is really exciting.
Well, he's got the money and legal team to fight you, that Koons too.
Yeah, I know. So I hope that it's fair use. We'll find out someday.
there are usually at the major schools that I've been at too, there's usually a specific person in the library that works on like the whole copyright law thing too. So they probably have answers to those questions. I certainly don't, but I'm always happy to philosophically debate, the different ramifications, just not legal. I cannot give you any legal advice today.
Everything I have is philosophical so far, and I'll deal with it when I get there.
Okay. Good luck.
One interesting little sidelight for Jeff Koons is he creates works like Andy Warhol did. It's all sort of created by people. He just creates a concept and someone else creates the art.
Yep.
And he himself takes his money, and the art he collects are old master paintings. So,
is that so? Now, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It makes sense though, because a lot of the even very kind of pontificating, bulging new artists, they still tend to really like the old stuff. Yeah. And not even old stuff, but if somebody like, I would be interested if the person that paid the 110 for a Basquiat was Jeff Koons, like recycling the money that he got from the rabbit. I would love to see actually something like that unfold. Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, even when you see some pop culture and cinematic references, whenever the really high-powered executives of this world, whenever that comes down to putting something in their office, it's always like an old master, like an old Dutch master painting, right? We always seem to default to things like that, which is kind of one of the problems, the game that I'm in too, teaching what I do, right? Is sometimes to convince my students that a Basquiat can be in the same neighborhood of a Leonardo da Vinci or something, right? And I don't feel like I'm not the snake oil salesman. I don't need to pitch anybody on this, but that's kind of sometimes what it feels like I'm doing as well. Yeah, I don't mind it though. So I'll talk about art all day long. If you want to.
Well, I'd be interested.
Keating is kind of the same as Basquiat to me. Sort of graffiti art. Keith Haring.
Yep. That was interesting. I had a student that just had and it obviously wasn't an original, but it was some print of Keith Haring just in their dining room. And then it took my class for them to go, holy crap, this is Keith Haring. This is like a huge deal back in the 80s and all that. So she went home and was telling her parents all about the print that they already had, so I thought that was kind of clever. Good for me, I guess, right? Good for them. They know a little bit more about the history of the things, but also I like that they already had it in their house. That means that somebody was paying attention, maybe. I don't know when, maybe in the 80s or something like that, or maybe they just liked what they saw. Keith Haring, that's a tough one, right? Because it's not really, he said in so many words all the time that it was about quantity, not quality. He said that directly, right? So how can you, sure, we're talking about Maurizio Catalan and people like that, but how could you in good conscience get behind a guy that's telling you, I only want to make a bunch of stuff, I don't want to make good stuff, right? I think that's interesting. And I love Keith Haring's work, so I don't mind having the discussion about it. But yeah, that's funny to me. Could you imagine if Michelangelo or somebody was saying, don't worry about the quality. The more of these things I can just get out, the better.
So Brian, what courses do you actually teach? What are your courses that you actually?
Yeah, I always do the big surveys. Art History 1 and Art History 2 are like the general education surveys. So people always then follow up with the question, do you like teaching them? And unfortunately for some people, I do. I really like, because I come from a classics background too. So the more I can talk about Roman architecture with people, I really like that. So I like the 1 and 2. I tend to say that contemporary art is my favorite class to teach, though, because we really have conversations that we're having right now in this Zoom room. We have these for the 15 weeks of the class. So to me, that's a really interesting way to go about a class. I almost run it like a seminar if I can. So with those 3, I also, I teach art appreciation. So we just kind of finally started to offer that again. I had taught it before. That's kind of fun for me because I really cut the class in half. The whole first half, I'm talking about how you actually make the art, right? So we learn about the actual materials. If COVID is over and we go back to campus in the fall, I like to do little field trips down to the actual studio art professors and watch how art gets done. And then we just talk about a thematic approach. What are all the things that art can be made about, for like the last 7 weeks. So it's a fun class, but it's meant to be a little bit more simplified. That's why the term history is not in that class, because I'm not teaching about the history of the art. It's more about the themes that go into it. And then I teach history of design too. So with us at CCM, we are getting everybody ready for a career in architectural design, interior design, industrial design, fashion design, and fashion merchandising. So believe it or not, I cover all 5 of those from prehistory to contemporary in the same 15-week class. That is terrifying and a lot of fun at the same time. So I like to do that class as well. So those are we also offer American art. We have another professor that is currently teaching that has for the last 3 decades, I think. So I'd love to get in there and teach American art as well. But I usually teach a load of somewhere around 5 or 6 or 7 classes per semester because, well, I like it. I like it a lot.
What do you use when I took art like 101, 102? We always had Jansen. Remember that great big fat?
Yep, I got Jansen back there too. Yeah, we're doing it with Stockstad nowadays.
I don't know that book yet.
Yeah, Stockstad. It's been around for a while, and they keep on making brief editions of it that are still pretty good, I guess, historically and thematically. So I've taught out of Jansen. I think I did that back at Colorado. I think I taught out of Jansen, but now I've been doing Stockstad for a good long while. So we can teach art history out of anything you want, like a lot of the times I tell the students that over the course of history, we have been altering what kind of art history gets told for a long time, and in different ways too. So when we enter into talking about post-colonial history, feminist history, these things weren't even admitted into the canon until like maybe 4 decades ago, right? So I always talk about how we've switched the teaching of art history, and that's really enjoyable for me too, to tell the students kind of how we got where we are today in art history, not just where we are politically or socially, but how it's a good case study, and the way you can take your profession and mold it into a better way of thinking about things, and then teach that. So I usually give them a little rundown of how things have gone.
So you also do art history and archaeology.
Yeah, and essentially what I did at Colorado was archaeology. So I went over and dug at a villa in Rome, just outside of Rome, for about 5 years too. So I'm without an straight archaeology degree, I'm as close as you can be to a practicing archaeologist, or I have been in my prior life as well. So I really enjoy that. Yeah, and I like making fun of the old archaeologists, and not old in age, but the ones that were practicing archaeology in the 1800s, when they were just like, just pick, gold thing, go to the museum with it. So I like making fun of all that and telling the students how archaeology is now done, with marking off each individual, segment and marking out trenches. And I should put in a pitch for The Dig is another good one on Netflix. They just launched that movie with Ray Fiennes, and it's about the finding of the Sutton Hoo treasure in England, and it gives you a little bit of a cool look at how archaeology actually happened in the real world. And I think it was the early 1900s with that one. So yeah, I like talking about archaeology too. It's all the A's, right? It's art history, archaeology, architecture, pretty much every anthropology sometimes you can get into. Yeah, it's all sorts of fun stuff that I get to do.
Yeah,
Well, I
it's
do.
fun to watch.
I have to say though.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I have to shake my head a little bit every time you mention when you were at Colorado.
Yeah.
Colorado State alumnus.
Uh-oh. I knew a lot of people up there, and it is kind of a fun rivalry too. I think when I was there for 3 years, the Buffs actually had 3 in a row in the football game too, so it wasn't even a contest. No, it's such a.
Usually when someone tells me that they're a Buff, I just yell, "Go Rams!" So.
I know. And I appreciate that. You should stay true. It's for those of you that don't know too, Boulder is where CU is, and that's kind of the really very liberal place. And then Colorado State, up in Fort Collins, right, is
which is superior.
It is.
I'm sorry.
It is known as a very, very strong agricultural school and all that stuff too.
It is one of the top veterinary schools in the country.
But they're so different in just the aims of it, so that's what made the rivalry pretty strong. And I appreciated that rivalry too. So I really enjoyed it. And actually,
yeah, it's kind of like for the natives here, it's like the Duke Tar Heel.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's almost like I don't know if it rises to the Duke UNC rivalry, but it almost would be like a Duke NC State. You know, like so the rivalry is still like really
fighting words.
Yeah. I had and then I went to UCLA afterwards. So then I would say UCLA USC is worse by a lot. I mean, they were
I'm sure.
they were still stealing each other's mascots off of campus and stuff when I was there. So that was pretty wild. The CU CSU rivalry was almost like an amicable rivalry, though, you know, because
exactly.
We were all Coloradans at the time. We just had the most beautiful, place in the world to go to school. It was nice.
Well, I really appreciate you presenting tonight, and I hope you don't mind that we ran over.
No, that's absolutely okay. I like the discussions that kind of come out of all of these, and when I ask questions during the presentation too, I'm always glad to get answers, and it gets things cooking in your head, and I like that kind of continuation of the conversation. So I'm glad to do it.
I told you that our group likes to ask questions and we enjoy learning, so that's why we don't have a hard stop. I don't ever, except for Becky that says, "Okay, I'm going now. You guys, you guys can keep talking." But yeah, are there any other questions for Brian tonight? Maybe he'll agree to come back and do another presentation later in the year.
Yeah, sure. I'm always up for it too. I could talk about some of the issues that we were just getting into, like about the changes in like archaeology teaching and things like that too. I mean, there's all sorts of fun stuff to talk about.
Well, me not being an art person or have much background with it, I thought it was very interesting presentation tonight, mainly because you brought up points that I wouldn't have been aware of otherwise, as far as what's considered contemporary art.
Yeah.
And I think that I have to admit that I think you're quite open-minded with some of these, like the banana on the wall.
Yeah.
To be able to accept that as an art form, and so I like your attitude towards it. That you're non-judgmental, whether it's art or not. It's really more from the artist's perspective.
Yeah, from the artist's perspective, but also maybe the reason that I do it like that is because when I'm in the classroom with the students, I think that their opinion is much more important than mine is, right? So that's why I go at it kind of like this, where I am going to stay completely open-minded and introduce all these issues, and it's really up to the students to then have those debates about things, because they do sometimes I'm not even expecting it to go such into really a high level of debate on certain things. And so far, I still never had like an issue that people got so contentious that they, got out of control. I still haven't had that, but we do talk about a lot of interesting things. And that's why I love that contemporary art class. I stay open-minded so everybody else can have directed opinions if they want to.
As you pointed out, especially with the contemporary art, there is this so much of the perception, the perceiver, how much is going on in their mind, and that is fully a part of the art experience, not just what an artist was trying to present, but rather how the viewer or participant gets involved with it. So
yeah, I like to talk about that with students too, that there is not just one party at issue with every artwork that's created, right? There is the artist, there is the viewer, there's the million of people probably in the middle of it who was actually instrumental in getting that painting from this museum to this gallery. So there are so many parties involved, and I think sometimes the viewer of the art actually kind of takes a weird tact. They think it's either all about them or it's just all about what the artist, they want to read the artist statement so they can just be told about the art. And then there's people that want to stand in front of art and have it be solely their experience. That's why I like the Rothko to bring that back, because that's only your experience. I don't care what Rothko wants me to get out of that, right? So that's why I kind of stay open about it too, because we do have to involve the whole experience of art. And maybe that's what closed-mindedness would get you to, right? Closed-mindedness is just going in there, only wanting one definition out of that art piece, and then spending your 30 seconds with arms crossed like this and moving to the next one. I always look at people in museums and galleries that do that, and I just say, I'm really sorry, for what's going on in your head right now. So that's the long and the short of why I stay so open-minded when I'm looking at art. Somebody else can do the closed-minded thing. That's fine.
I'm kind of surprised you didn't mention anything about street art, like graffiti, and because I know that there's some street artists that in certain cities, and they sign their own works that they do on buildings. And
yeah, and I just made a couple of references. I guess we just talked about Keith Haring a little bit, who started pretty much the whole phenomenon, and then Banksy is probably one of the biggest artists. So I briefly but yeah, I think that's a big deal for that's also the spectacular, right? And that's the experiential, because a lot of the times you can just come upon something like that. Like I got a book back there, the Banksy in New York book, where all of a sudden Banksy will show up in a place and he'll be there for like a couple of months or something like that. And you can actually just come upon his works, right? And then sometimes it turns into a big deal. And he's also got a documentary, Exit Through the Gift Shop, that basically expresses how disillusioned he has become with his own work and everybody that has touched his work, and all of that too. It's you should watch it all the way through to the end, because they blur out his face, but they actually talk to him and you get to hear from what he says about stuff too. So yeah, I should say it this way too. When I'm teaching my contemporary art class, my students bring in enough street artists that I don't even have to. Like I always ask them to bring in stuff from outside, and that's usually all they bring in. Sometimes it's gaming engines and gaming artists nowadays. That's also what they're into. But yeah, they bring in the street artists to me. So they usually instruct me about all that stuff.
Well, I know some towns even commission artists to put murals on their buildings.
So is that a street artist anymore?
Well, I don't know, but not necessarily, because it's not necessarily freestyle. It's more, I guess, planned out, because the theme was, they'd have certain themes and they'd have like 9 different murals on buildings throughout the town.
Yeah, there's that, and I just forgot the name of it. I just visited it when I was in Miami a year and a half ago.
Lake Placid?
Westwood Walls. I think it's the Westwood Walls. And that's a whole district, where they bring street artists in to do basically commissioned works in there. And I was kind of asking facetiously, right? When you get commissioned to do a work, are you a street artist any longer? Right? Because somebody gave you money and commissioned you to do something. There is now no longer illegality to it. There's no, you shouldn't be here. There's no creative expression directly. Not 100% of your own creative expression if you got commissioned for something. I'm being judgmental about that, but it's a good question that I ask the kids too when I'm in class. So.
Well, like even if you do have your freedom of expression, it was juried,
Right.
and proved. I think I was thinking about this earlier when we first were talking about Banksy, that there's just this really blurry line between like guerrilla street art and Banksy and people who are commissioned and even get grants to make murals on the outside of a building. And I found myself just particularly confronted by it when I saw my first Banksy in real life in New Orleans in whatever the summer before COVID was. I've lost all context.
I talk in kind of strange terms about the pre-COVID, during COVID. I don't remember when I was at some place last.
In the before times, I remember encountering my first Banksy in the wild, and it was on a whole wall of graffiti art.
Okay.
But the Banksy had a piece of plexiglass mounted over top of it to protect it.
That's like cheating.
Yeah,
even graffiti art,
it raises,
even street artists hate when people tag their work too, which I always think is a kind of a funny thing.
Where is the line? Banksy is doing it illegally, but it's got the shock value, so we allow it. And then he sort of challenges that with like the girl with the balloon print that shreds. And then there's this line between, as long as it's pre-approved, it's okay, regardless of the quality or content. And I think that there's a really big conversation there.
And maybe the last part to mention there is, like you said at the beginning of your comment, is the creative expression really there? That organization, like let's say Westwood Walls, they then sought you out and gave you the commission. So it's like your creative expression is still there, but they've directed what they want to have because they already know what your work looks like, right? So there's that extra addition to your creative impulses are still intact, but you have been directed to a certain space to give them something, right?
Yeah, I sat on a grant jury recently, and there were a couple of mural applications, and I found myself really torn, just ideologically, about whether or not to prioritize giving those artists money over some of the other things that were being applied for. It was really difficult.
Some of the textbooks I've used before, like this one, I've used this textbook before, and they actually devote the whole chapter to street art and actually talking about some of these different ramifications. I moved on from that textbook though, because the students said they hated it. It was too dense. It's too dense of writing or something. So I went to the other one. But yeah, it's an important enough topic in the contemporary world to devote a lot of time to it. And also the problem with that one is it stopped kind of at like the year 2000 or something like that, which is no longer even contemporary. So all of these new issues with legality and things like that are kind of taken out of that discussion, and they need to be in there too.
Yeah, the conversation that we had as a panel around the murals were the most contentious conversations that we had.
I bet public murals, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Public art projects are the most contentious, and I would say I've never seen a public mural project that wasn't contentious, like that double negative, right? They're all, because everybody in the public sphere wants and appreciates something different, it seems like. I mean, you can't please all the people all the time. Is that what it is? Yeah. So.
Well, these were also particularly contentious because they had gotten approval from the businesses to put the mural on the side of their building. They had to get permission from the owners to do it, but then they were seeking money from the City Arts Council to fund the project.
So that's a weird public-private divide there.
Yeah, it was extremely contentious. And I can't share what the decisions were, but we say that it was a very, very contentious debate amongst the five of us on the panel.
Yeah, I bet.
So, yeah. And also, I am gonna have to hop off of here, but I also wanted to say thank you for this lecture. And I particularly was excited and pleased at the diversity of artists that you curated for this.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. And I do put that a lot of thought into that when I'm preparing presentations, because it is really, it's inappropriate in our world today to not be diverse and to promote equity in presentations like this. So so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you, and have a good night, everyone.
You too.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you everybody for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully we can have you, well, I kept wondering whether we could take your classes online, but and hopefully that you're going to be going back to campus soon.
So far, I'm still planning on trying to offer at least one class online each semester now, because again, COVID is just so weird and fluid. So I think Art History 1 is the one I think I'll get to do online this next semester or fall semester. So, and I assume everybody is, no matter where you are in the country or the world, if you have an internet connection, I think you can do that.
Yeah.
So who knows?
I was wondering if the community college would let us sign up for just like one class.
I think we still, I should say it this way, the non-matriculating student is now a little bit of a contentious issue, but I still think they are taking students that if you want to pay for the class, they will let you take the class. They're now just talking a little bit about no more auditors and classes and things like that. I mean, it's all the new environment that we find ourselves in because of COVID is going to be a complicated one because of enrollments falling and things like that. But I'm pretty sure if you want to take the class and you're willing to pay the college for the class, then you can take that class.
Yeah,
I hope.
And I think, all colleges should do that because, a lot of us that are older and have been in college many, many, many years ago, there are new classes coming about that I'd like to learn on, but I don't necessarily want to enroll in the college to take a whole curriculum, but
yep. And all the way up to this semester, I've had plenty of what I would call senior students, and they are usually the most engaged in the class. So I will take all students into my class, and I'm glad to. And I hope that continues, because a lot of the senior students would file under that non-matriculating student. So if that ever becomes an issue for certain colleges, I hope it doesn't, because again, if the wish to take the class is there, then I don't think we should be turning people away. And I don't think we will. And I should say, hopefully right now we won't do that. But I don't know I don't make the decisions beyond that. So yeah, come on by.
Well,
I think in fall you'll be okay.
It actually is a smart move for colleges, especially with you're right, with the decrease in enrollment, but so anyway.
And I should also say we're looking forward to popping that enrollment back up now that we're going to be back on campus in fall, hopefully. So
yeah, but all those extra students, they're just there for the college life, they're not there for the classes.
Yeah, well, that's why I like it at my school. We don't even have dorms or anything, so they're just there for the intelligence level of our classes, right? So just like the vigor of it.
There you go. So, well, thank you again, and everybody have a great weekend.
All right, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Very interesting. Bye-bye. Good night.